The joint hearings of the two select committees will come to order. We will proceed with questioning by counsel. Mr. Eggleston, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hall, yesterday you testified about the diversion memos, and I think that you testified that you believed you typed them sometime in the spring of 1986. If you could turn to Exhibit 8 in the book in front of you. Do you have that in front of you?
Yes, sir.
And I believe it was also your testimony that you recalled that this particular memo had been through a series of different drafts back and forth as different corrections were made. Is that your recollection?
Yes, sir, it is.
And I think that you also testified that you had some recollection that Admiral Poindexter at some time might have made some corrections to this document as well.
That's my memory. I'm not sure if it's accurate, but that's my memory.
And do you recall that this document near the end of it makes reference to the need to get the President's approval for the plan that's set forth in the particular document?
I believe it says that, sir. Just a moment.
Okay, I think it's on.
Yes. Yes, it is, sir.
Okay. And this is the document that actually sets forth the diversion of some amount of money to the Contras. Do you recall that?
Yes.
It's on page 4. Let me ask you, are you familiar, there was a prof message and it was previously provided to the committee and declassified. It was McFarland Exhibit number 73, I think. It is not in the book in front of you, but I would just like to read to you from this exhibit, and I think it corroborates your recollection of Admiral Poindexter's involvement in this particular memorandum. It is a prof note that was written from Colonel North to Mr. McFarland on April 7th of 1986, and it is relating to Mr. McFarland, the events that had taken place with a meeting between Colonel North and Ghorbanifar only a few days prior to this note. And in this prof note it says, quote, "Per request of JMP, have prepared a paper for our boss which lays out these arrangements." I take it the boss of Mr. McFarland and Admiral Poindexter and Colonel North is likely to be the President. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would, sir.
Let me further tell you that the document which you have in front of you as Exhibit 8 is the document which the Attorney General actually found over the weekend of November 22nd of 1986. And this is the document which has been provided as well to the committees pursuant to our various document requests. If you could look at page 1 of this document, I think you have testified about the handwriting in the upper right-hand corner. In addition, about a quarter of the way down the page, it reads, on September 14, and the 14 is crossed out. Do you see that there?
Yes, sir.
And a correction is made to this particular document. Is that true?
Yes, sir.
And a 13 is written above that?
Yes, sir.
Let me direct you now to Exhibit 8A. If you look at Exhibit 8A, and if you look at the same line to which I just directed your attention, the correction, the 14 has now been changed to a 13. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And let me also advise you that this document has been fairly recently received by the committee, and that this document had actually been on your floppy disk of your computer. Have you been told that?
I believe I have.
And this document was never provided and was apparently in no one's files as a hard copy. Have you been told that as well?
That it was found as a hard copy in a file?
That it was never found.
Oh, it was never found.
A hard copy of it was never found.
I believe I've heard that, yes.
And that the only version of this that anyone has ever found was what was actually on your computer disk.
Yes.
And I guess it's also fair to say that it appears that this is a later document, that the correction that was on Exhibit 8 has now been made onto Exhibit 8A. Is that fair?
Yes.
And I guess you also know that no cover memo was ever found for these documents indicating a transmittal from Colonel North to Admiral Poindexter or any further transmittal of this document onto the President. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
You have testified that Admiral Poindexter made various changes on this document. I take it that the changes that you recall, you do not recall him responding to this document that the idea is crazy, that we can't do this. The changes he made were textual changes. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So he never returned the document suggesting that this policy or plan should not be pursued.
That's correct.
Ms. Hall, let me move quickly to another area. I was struck yesterday in your testimony about one particular aspect, and let me just ask you some questions about that. Is it fair to say that at the time on November 21st, when you received the altered original documents, or the original documents from Colonel North, that you received this as an ordinary secretarial assignment? He simply handed you the documents, that there were changes on them, and that you anticipated that you were to make the changes.
Yes.
Is that fair?
Yes.
He did not discuss with you at that time what it was that he was planning to do.
That's correct.
And he did not discuss with you the gravity of making changes on original System 4 documents.
No, he did not.
I think that you testified yesterday that at the time that he placed these in front of you, you were somewhat uneasy.
That's true.
And you made the changes and the corrections because you recall, or you trusted Colonel North and you believed that what he would be doing was right. Is that fair?
That's correct.
And after making these alterations and after doing the various copies, I think it was your testimony that you recall that you may have been interrupted at a time when Colonel North was standing at the shredder and shredding various documents.
Yes, I believe that's my memory.
Okay. And as a secretary, you saw your boss shredding documents. I take it you thought this was something that was more appropriate for a secretary to do rather than for Colonel North, and as a result, you offered to help him.
That's correct.
Did he at that time tell you that this was something you should not get involved in?
No.
He didn't tell you, Fawn or Ms. Hall, whatever he called you, go home, don't worry about this, this is nothing you should have anything to do with?
No, I was part of the team.
So he permitted you to participate with him in shredding this stack of documents?
Yes, sir.
And let me now just move to November 25th. I take it you've testified that you watched the press conference, you had lunch, came back from lunch. There came a time when Brenda Rieger, the NSC security officer, was packing up the office, putting boxes away, and at that time you recognized or saw that these altered documents and the copies of them were still on top of your desk.
That's correct.
And this caused you some concern, and there comes a time when you communicate with Colonel North, and I think that you testified that in your time you called him, you attempted to convey to him that there was a problem with the documents.
I attempted to convey to him that there was a problem with documents, yes. As I've testified before, I was talking in a whisper and not really saying anything over the phone. I mean, in graphic terms, it was sort of vague, but I was trying by the tone of my voice to get across that there was some urgency, and then I insisted that he come back.
But in any event, you at least conveyed that there was something going on at the office and that he simply had to return.
Yes, I did.
And after that conversation, you go upstairs and secrete the documents about your person, and about that time, Colonel North does show up.
That's correct.
You had a conversation with them inside of his office.
Yes.
And did you indicate to him at that time that you had documents in your back?
Yes, I did. I don't think I indicated to him that they were in my boots, but I did turn slightly and say, do you notice that I have them in here? Can you tell? Will anybody be able to see that I have these in my back? That was the idea, and he said no.
And you knew at that time that if you were to leave the room that Ms. Rieger would be checking briefcases and other things to ensure that documents would not be taken out of the room.
Yes, sir.
And I take it Colonel North knew that as well.
Colonel North, yes, was asked his briefcase to be checked, yes.
And so when these documents were actually taken outside of the room and past the security checkpoint, if you will, it was you who actually took them out.
That's correct.
But Colonel North knew that you were going to take these documents out.
He knew I had documents that I was taking out, yes.
And if someone was going to be stopped at the exit of that office, it was going to be you, not Colonel North.
Yes.
At the elevator on the third floor, as you were getting ready to leave the building, did you at that time attempt to give him the documents or once again indicate that you wanted to get rid of him?
Yes, I did. As I've said, I motioned with, I don't remember with a gesture or a word that I was going to give them to him, and he said, why don't we just wait till we get outside?
So again, it was you who actually carried the documents outside of the building.
Yes, sir.
And it was because he told you, no, you keep them until we get outside, and it was not until you'd arrived in the car that the documents were actually transferred over to Colonel North. Is that right?
That's correct.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have nothing further.
Mr. Van Cleve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hall, I have only a couple of questions. Would you please refer to Committee Exhibit 8, FH8? You've testified that on the afternoon of November 21st, 1986, Colonel North gave you a group of documents that had been marked up and asked you to make a series of alterations and changes in them. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
To the best of your recollection, was this document or any form of this document among the documents that Colonel North asked you to alter that day?
No, sir.
And would your answer be the same as to Committee Exhibit 8A?
Yes, sir.
And is your recollection on that point clear?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
We will begin with the, under the 15-minute rule, with the principal questioner, Senator Boren.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hall, we appreciate very much the candor of your testimony yesterday and the thoroughness of your testimony, and I will do my best not to duplicate the questions that were asked of you yesterday, but there are just a few items I'd like to go back over with you this morning.
Okay.
You testified that during the day on November 21st, when you were working on altering the documents, and later when you were shredding some of the documents or assisting Colonel North in doing so, that you became increasingly uneasy during this period of time.
I don't know that I became increasingly uneasy, sir. I think I testified that I was uneasy when Colonel North asked me to alter the documents, and I think you could say that we became increasingly busy.
Yes. Why? That was clear. Why were you uneasy?
I was initially had a moment of uneasiness when he asked me to alter the documents because, in fact, they were completed actions that had gone to a person and had had an action taken, and to change the content of a memorandum that had already been approved was something I was uneasy with. But again, I had that moment of uneasiness. It passed because, as I've said before, I believe strongly in Colonel North. I believe him to be an honest, fair, and a good person with good motives.
You felt he simply wouldn't have asked you to have done anything if it had been improper.
Correct.
Now, on the day of Tuesday, the day of the press conference, you indicated that Colonel North came back to the office and he indicated to you that he had been fired by the President.
Yes, sir.
And then you watched the press conference together. Was there anyone else there besides the two of you watching the press conference?
Yes, sir. A friend of Colonel North's and ours had been in the building, I assume, to visit someone else, and he, probably unknowing what was going to happen also,
Right.
just happened to tap on the door and came in, and his name was Bill Kernan. He works in Roslyn, and he was just a friend and just wanted to shake his hand and say hello, and in fact, the press conference started. He joined us in the office, and I believe Colonel Earl and possibly Craig Coy were in the office also.
How did the group and how did Colonel North react to the press conference as you were watching it?
We all watched it. I frankly was stunned. Colonel North didn't really show any emotion. I mean, I believe he was probably, from my knowing him, disappointed, but also I believe, I don't know if it's come out, but Colonel North, I believe, I've come to know that he had offered his resignation also. I think he probably was disappointed in the fact that he was fired rather than his resignation being accepted, but he did not get angry, he didn't bang the table, he didn't get upset, he didn't say bad words. He just took it.
Was Colonel North indicated to you that he had offered his resignation?
I can't remember if he had or not. I think it might have come out that morning that he had.
That he
I think
had
it probably came out when he mentioned that the president had fired him. But as I've said before, he never showed any anger towards the president or I think my only knowing him that I'm sure that he must have been disappointed.
Then, did he leave before you left the office? You said you went to lunch with a friend that day in the White House mess. Did Colonel
It was a
North leave,
special
or
occasion. I had invited a good friend of mine. It was unusual. In fact, I never hardly went to lunch, but this was a special occasion. And again, I hadn't expected, that event to occur that day. And Colonel North, excuse me, when I had was very upset and I said I was going to cancel lunch, I just couldn't go to lunch, I couldn't think straight. He said, no, he says, don't let this get you, this is a special day, I think you should go. He insisted that I go, and I did so. And I believe that he was gone when I returned.
Then, and then what time did the representatives of the security staff come to, in essence, seal the office?
My recollection, it was in the late afternoon. I could be wrong. I think it was around possibly 4.
So they'd been there a while when you reached Colonel North on the telephone?
Yes, sir.
And then it took a while for him to come on over. They were there sealing the office, and
I don't think he planned to return to the office. As I said before, I placed the call when I realized that Brenda Rieger and the others were going to, in fact, close up for the evening, and I had discovered the altered documents and the others, as I've mentioned, and I needed to talk to him. I needed to know, for him to come back.
Were you at all concerned? You mentioned then getting the documents once he got there, and the three of you, Colonel North and Mr. Green, yourself, leaving the building. Were you at all concerned at that point, since at that point in time you knew the President had dismissed Colonel North, you knew they were attempting to seal the office, obviously to secure the documents. Were you at all concerned yourself about placing yourself in any jeopardy to be taking the documents out at that point?
Sir, I was emotionally distraught at the time. It's a policy of mine, as I've said before, not to talk about what I do, and also to protect what we were doing in the office, and I believed in the Iran initiative and the Contra initiative, and I thought that exposure of it would have bad ramifications, and again, I was emotional, and I don't think I realized at the time the ramifications or the seriousness of my actions.
Yes. That's understandable. And as you're leaving the building, you first made a gesture, some sign out in the corridor that you wanted to give the documents back to Colonel North. He said, "Not yet," as I recall.
Yes, sir.
And then you got outside, and I believe you were walking along outside the building. At which point in time, you again attempted to give the documents back, and I believe it was Mr. Green at that point, was it, who said, "Wait till we get in the car."
Yes, sir. I probably believe that those two statements were made as if I had brought them out in the middle of the hallway, perhaps someone could walk by, or if I had brought them out in the middle of the street, someone could have observed it, and it was a way in which to get in the car where no one could observe what I was doing.
So Colonel North and Mr. Green both were anxious that you not take the documents out in front of other people, that you wait until you get in.
I don't know if the word is anxious. I mean, they weren't, frantic. They just said, "Hey, we'll wait till we get inside the car." I mean, like I said before, I think it was a...
And then when you got into the car, you handed the documents over to Colonel North?
Correct.
And during this time, did Mr. Green indicate to you that you should not be taking these documents out?
No, sir. Mr. Green didn't comment on any of what was going on, except, as I've said later, about the shredding.
And he also said, don't give the wait till we get in the car. That was his only other comment.
Yes, sir.
Now, so he didn't in any case indicate to you, he didn't say anything to you like, "Miss Hall, as a lawyer, I should tell you that you might be in some jeopardy for taking these documents out, or you should take them back and turn them back over to the security director"? Did he give you any kind of advice at all about taking the documents back?
No, sir.
Now, he also discussed with you, I believe, in that same in the car at the same time, after you were giving the documents to Colonel North, He did discuss the shredding with you, didn't he, Mr. Green?
Yes, yes.
And he asked you what you were going to say if you were asked about them. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you said we always shred documents,
Yes.
which you knew in essence was not quite an accurate reflection because you'd never really wholesale shredded documents, taking whole files out and shredding them before. You'd just shredded things in the normal course of business, isn't that correct?
We had never shredded to the volume we had that day,
The
no.
volume that day. And Mr. Green indicated to you that he would be pleased with that answer. Is that correct?
I believe he did. I'm not sure of exact words, but I believe he said, that's great, or
No,
that's good, or
I
something
think
to
you
that
said
effect.
yesterday that he said good when
Yeah.
you said what you would say. Now, when the representative, I believe Mr. Stevens of the White House Counsel's office called you, I believe it was on Thanksgiving Day,
That's correct.
to ask you about the shredding, you gave the very same answer to him that you had told Mr. Green you would give, that is, that you just normally shredded documents.
Yes, sir. I probably believe I would have said that regardless of whether Mr. Green had said that to me or not. I was still very much in the protective mode.
But it was consistent with what you told Mr. Green and his approval of that kind of an answer when he said good or indicated to you that that was a good answer.
Yes, sir.
But I want to ask you just one more time because, while Colonel North was not a lawyer, and certainly you're not a lawyer, Mr. Green is a lawyer and a sworn officer of the court, and he at no time tried to dissuade you or made strong statements to you about not taking documents or about being truthful about the shredding. He didn't in any way attempt to urge you to preserve evidence.
No, sir. I don't know that Mr. Green knew at the time when I actually left the Suite 302 whether or not he knew I had the documents on me at that time. I believe I don't know what he knew and when he knew it, but I don't believe that, he wasn't in the office when I told Colonel North that I had the documents on me, and he wasn't
But he obviously
present
knew
at the
you
phone
had
call.
something with you because he said, wait till we get into
That's
the car.
right. He might have realized that when I was at the elevator. I don't know when he knew.
Some point in time he realized.
That's correct.
And obviously he saw you, did he not, give the documents that was in his car when you gave the documents to Colonel North.
Yes, sir.
So he knew that you had brought things out of the office with the security officer having attempted to seal the office and that you'd given them to Colonel North in his car.
That's right.
And he didn't tell you to take them back.
That's right.
Let me ask about the KL-43 devices and the fact that I believe you testified that there was an assistant, a lady that worked with General Secord who came to pick up deliveries of the new encoding devices, in essence, on a regular basis.
That's right.
Now, were these encoding devices, the software, so to speak, for these machines were, of course, highly classified. When these envelopes were handing over, was there any indication on those codes that they were classified? Did they carry any classification?
No, sir, there wasn't. They came to us from the NSA in a cardboard box, and there was usually, I might be wrong, but I think approximately 15, and they were in gray plastic canisters. They had, in fact, no classification whatsoever, and in fact, I believe them probably to be old coding tapes. I don't know why I had that. They were not marked, for instance, May, June, whatsoever, and I indicated before that I took a black magic marker and took the canisters so as not to have them mixed up and indicated May, June,
Yes.
and I did not carry them in my hands. I put them in an envelope, sealed the envelope, and gave it to Shirley Napier.
But they carried no classification on them either when they came to you or when you gave them to Ms. Napier.
No, they didn't.
And were you aware of the fact that these were sensitive either the KL-43 machines themselves or the encoding devices that were to be inserted or used in them? Were you aware that these were classified pieces, sensitive pieces of equipment and sensitive pieces of encoding devices?
Sir, I would normally think that a coding device was. I think that there was some discussion as to, at one point, I'm not sure if it was specifically KL-43, but possibly about being able to give a secure device to a foreign official, and I believe that was discussed. I'm not sure if the KL-43 was the machine that was in fact offered as a device that could be given to a foreign official, therefore it wouldn't make it quite as, I believe, as sensitive. I understand your question.
Yes.
You know where I'm coming from?
Yes, I do understand, and it's just puzzling to me that when it came over from NSA to your office that there was never any indication given to you for example, as the person that would handle it, that the equipment or the encoding devices that were put in them were in essence classified, but apparently they were not. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, if the coding tapes got out to someone, of course they could descramble our messages. If they had a KL-43 or was receiving, or,
But there was,
you know,
I understand that, but there was no official notice on
No.
those. Let me ask about contributors. Some contributors to the Contra cause have, of course, testified in these hearings. Did any of these contributors ever come to Colonel North's office to meet with Colonel North while you were working for Colonel North and setting up appointments for him?
Spitz Channel often and his employees would bring a contributor to the office, yes.
So his employees would bring, I believe Mr. O'Boyle testified that he had gone to Colonel North's office on one occasion. He was a contributor who made a private donation.
I recognize the name, yes.
Do you remember any other private contributors, or were there large numbers of private contributors who came?
I believe some of the names were Ellen Garwood, Barbara Newington, Barbara Christian. There are maybe a few more, but the names just don't come to mind.
Would you say, in terms of numbers, just a ballpark estimate, would you say over this period of time that you were working for Colonel North, were there half a dozen of these private contributors that were brought in by Mr. Channel or his representatives, or were there a dozen, or were there 50 or 100? How many would you say came through the office during this period of time?
I would estimate maybe 10 or 12.
10 or 12 during this period of time. Thank you very much, Ms. Hall. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Before proceeding further, the chair proposes to make part of the record exhibits BGS 1 through 28 and FH 1 through 10. These are the documents in the black notebook. Without objection, it'll be so ordered. And the chair recognizes Mr. Stokes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hall, on November 21st, Colonel North asked you to make certain alterations on certain documents. But the time that he began doing some shredding, I do not recall that he asked you to assist him in the shredding. Is that correct?
I don't recall that he did. I don't. My memory is very unclear about how the shredding incident started. I believe, as I said, my memory is that he began pulling documents and I joined him.
Right.
I don't recall that he specifically said, come over and help or do this or do that. And I think because my memory fails me there that it must have been the way that I remember it, as far as he started and I joined in.
Sure. Now, it was obvious to you that he was doing some very selective shredding. Isn't that true?
That would be a fair description, I guess.
Sure. And in your joining in with him, obviously there was some purpose for this shredding, was there not?
Yes.
And what was the purpose?
I don't know the purpose, sir.
Well, as you joined in with your boss in this shredding in which he had not asked you to join with, you did feel that there was a reason for this.
I guess what was probably going through my mind is that the Iran initiative had been exposed, and I realized that at the time, and I don't. That was a feeling I had, so I probably associated with the shredding with that.
And did you surmise that this was a way of trying to cover up something in conjunction with the Iran initiative or the Contra initiative?
I don't use the word cover up. I would use the word protect.
Well, you've used the term protect several times in conjunction with the Iran-Contra initiative. But you've also said to us that you were a secretary and that you knew nothing about policy, things of that sort, right?
I am not a policymaker, sir. I did work for Colonel North for 4 years and became familiar with the Central American effort to support the Contras, the Central America situation and the effort to support the Contras, and also the initiative to talk to moderates in a country, as I've said before, is as strategically important as Iran, and the daily effort and concern of the President and Ali personally himself, and the pressure that was put on these gentlemen and by the media and the American citizens that wanted their family home, and I became familiar with that concern.
I can
It's
appreciate.
not a policymaker that's becoming familiar after working for 4 years with the policy that's been set.
Chair, I can appreciate that very much, but how does that fall within the realm of a secretary to protect the Iran-Contra initiative?
I wasn't the one initiating the protecting, sir. That's my answer, sir.
That's your answer?
Yes.
Okay. Yesterday, you told the committee that in addition to altering NSC System 4 documents on November 21st, you had altered some other documents in the fall of 1985. You remember that?
I remember the testimony that we determined and came to the conclusion that one document was changed in 1985. I don't have a specific independent recollection of that, sir.
All right, that particular exhibit would be Exhibit FH6A. You want to take a look at that? Okay. Is that a document that you altered in 1985?
I don't know, sir.
Well, have you taken a look at it, Ms. Hall?
As I have said before, I don't have an independent recollection of altering any documents that were that were done on November 21st. I have changed many documents in my 4 years working for Colonel North. I don't have a specific recollection of altering the type of documents that were altered on November 21st.
And as to that particular exhibit, you have no recollection whatsoever with reference to alteration of it?
That's correct, sir. I typed for 4 years, and I typed an awful lot of documents, and I don't have independent recollection of any specific documents.
Sure. Can you tell us why this particular exhibit was found in Colonel North's files?
Because it was in a System 4. It was in the subject and cron files. Every document that we ever typed went into a file.
Isn't that a System 4 file?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Would all of them be found in Mr. North's files?
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, yesterday you told us about an April 1986 diversion memorandum that was sent to Admiral Poindexter and then returned for revision. You recall that?
I'm sorry, yes.
All right. You also noted that it was unusual that the memorandum was not dated and had no addressee or System 4 number. I believe you said that one of the possible explanations for this was that there had been a draft Poindexter to the President memorandum to which this was to have been an attachment. You recall that?
No, I don't.
All right, let's turn our attention to the piece of paper that is in Mr. McFarland's handwriting, the one with the 6 System 4 document numbers on it. That's the one that you taped to Colonel North's prof terminal?
That's one that I saw taped to Colonel North's desk, yes.
You didn't tape it to us?
No, sir.
Okay. You had seen it there for an extensive period of time?
Yes, sir.
Do you know the significance of this piece of paper?
As I've said before, I remember the document appearing, the slip of paper appearing in the summer of '85, I believe, as I said, when the Congress was looking into the role, the activities in Central America, and particularly Colonel North's. I remember seeing it around that time period. I never asked Colonel North what it was there for, and he never told me.
Okay. Can you in any way relate it to any altered documents?
Sir, when Colonel North gave me the documents to alter on November 24th, without talking with him at all, without asking or him telling me, I came to my own conclusion that they were in fact probably the same documents that appeared on that list. And in fact, when I was asked what documents I had altered in the very beginning, when I was being questioned without having seen this or the documents, I rattled off a number of 402008, which is fairly close to 402003.
Okay. Now, on another matter, Are we to understand that in terms of the safe that Mr. North had there in his office, that you never saw any money in that safe?
No, sir.
Okay. On the day that you borrowed the $60 from him in the money orders, did you see him go to the safe for those?
No, I didn't, sir.
When you returned the money to him, did you see him go to the safe at that time?
No, I didn't.
Okay. You did tell us yesterday, though, that the rumors you had heard about him keeping cash in his safe you felt were true.
Yes, sir. I have said before that I had a feeling, and I've used the word rumors, maybe it's small talk that was in the office. I don't remember, sir, and I said that I think that probably came from being shown these traveler's checks that I had cashed myself, which I had not remembered. I had a feeling that there were rumors about that, and then when I was shown later the traveler's checks, I associate probably that feeling with the fact that I had actually received traveler's checks, and that kind of confirms my feelings without me being able to describe why I had that feeling.
I see. Did you ever see any other persons with money in the safes, other safes there in the office?
No, sir.
And I believe you told us yesterday that when Miss Napier was alleged to have brought $16,000 to the office, that you do not recall ever having received it.
That's true, sir. That's my recollection.
Did you, in your capacity as secretary, open Mr. North's mail?
Yes, sir.
And what about packages that were delivered to him?
I have been asked about that. I can only say that when someone was delivering something, perhaps I walked it up to him, and if he was there, I just gave it to him. I let him open it himself. When it came from perhaps State Department, CIA, DOD, other departments and agencies within the U.S. government, that I usually probably was expecting it as part of a package that we were doing, and usually those documents were attached to documents we were doing to the National Security Advisor, and therefore I would be expecting them and would usually open them. It's a possibility I've opened other stuff that has come from General Secord. I just didn't open that particular one. I don't remember opening it, and I don't remember seeing $16,000.
Okay. If he was not there and someone delivered a package to him, would you open the package or just put it on his desk?
I would probably open it, but depending... It's a very hard question to ask, sir. I worked there for 4 years. It's a very difficult question to answer. I could have, and I might have just laid it on his desk. Perhaps I might have laid it on his desk, or I might have opened it. It probably went both ways.
Okay. Was there ever an occasion when you opened an envelope or a package and there was money in it?
I don't recall, sir.
Could have happened?
I don't remember ever opening an envelope with money in it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Hall. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hatch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hall, I want to welcome you to the committee. I want to thank you for testifying. I think personally you've been a candid and a forthright witness.
Thank you, sir.
And you've been helpful to our understanding of just what happened here, at least to the extent that you have been able to testify. And I'm sure that you never expected to be in this position, but the fact is that you and the man you work for have pretty well captivated this country for quite a bit of time, and you've captured the attention of, I think, the entire country. Now, I believe you were quoted recently as agreeing with the late Andy Warhol that every person indeed gets 15 minutes of fame. And I personally believe you have exceeded your allotment. I don't intend to take too much more time with you, but what I'd like to do is just go through some questions that I hope will help us to understand a little bit more about what happened here, about the people involved, and so forth. As I mentioned, Colonel North has, of course, become the center of attention. I read a very interesting and good article in the Washington Post yesterday covering all of the various things he might be. And I'm sure we're going to get a chance to hear him testify. As I suggested last December, we should have then. But you worked very closely with Colonel North for 4 years. You probably know him as well as anybody from a work standpoint, and I would appreciate it if you would just take just a minute for us and tell us a little bit about this mystery figure. At least he's a mystery to the rest of us. What was he like to work for? What kind of a man was he? What were his principal motivations, at least as far as you can see, as you could see?
Well, regarding your question, how is he to work for, I would say that he was probably every secretary's dream of a boss. He was easygoing, patient. He was motivated to do the best job that he possibly knew for in the best interest of his country. And I think that quality transferred into the people that work for him.
How hard did he work?
Very hard.
Like?
He began his usual days, Monday through Fridays began 7:30 in the morning with a staff meeting, and the day started off a crack of fire from that point on until he left. I don't think he ever left the office before 9 or 10, and usually sometimes he would stay till 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning. I don't say that you shouldn't read the newspaper, but Colonel North didn't even have the time to read the newspaper, usually. He very seldom went to lunch, and only if it was a working lunch. And many times friends hadn't seen him in a long time, they'd say, oh, can't we just go to lunch and have a chat? And he would always put his work before himself.
I see.
Always.
Well, there's been a great deal of publicity about Colonel North lately, of course, as you know, and he's been described as everything from a hero to a zealot. Based on your understanding of him, Miss Hall, do you feel that Colonel North has been accurately depicted in the media thus far, and if not, how should he be portrayed?
I don't think he's been portrayed correctly. In some circumstances, yes, and many others, no. I don't think zealot is an accurate word to describe Colonel North. I believe that Colonel North was a hard-working person, and I think that he was effective, and he had a can-do, positive attitude. He didn't like to give up. He always thought there was a means to achieve goals, and he didn't give up. And I don't think that those qualities are a zealot. I think that they're not a rogue elephant. I believe they're good qualities. I think that a positive attitude in an office with as much work as we had to do and the problems that we had to do to overcome all those, he had the best qualities for that job.
In your employment with Colonel North, Miss Hall, I take it you knew he worked beginning in the late summer of 1985 on the Iran initiative. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you also knew that he was working on the Contra issues as well. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Given the scrutiny that the Iran and Contra issues are receiving by these hearings, I think it's easy for many of us to get the impression that that's all Colonel North did. But is that the way it was, Miss Hall, or were you working on a number of other very important projects as well? You indicated in your opening remarks that he was, but that wasn't all he was working on, was it?
He worked on Central America and terrorism, international counterterrorism. Both of those subjects are broad and very far-reaching. They range from congressional to private inquiries, public speeches, to policy setting, to interagency meetings. Terrorism, for instance, we have multilateral, bilateral, extensive talks with other countries in an effort to counter terrorism. Those take up a lot of time during the office, in addition to a terrorist incident happening, which takes up all of your time that particular day. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, you get backlogged on the routine things that come in. I mean, the day was every single day for 4 years. We were busy. You
indicated in your opening remarks that he handled Central America, international terrorism, not just Central America, but all over the world, the problems that we were concerned about, the streamlining of crisis management by this administration. Whenever there was a crisis, Colonel North was the man that usually handled it. They turned to him. Yes, sir. I see. I think they turned to him because he was a person that when it was a crisis, he wouldn't say he was too tired, or he wouldn't say, I'll handle it in the morning. He said, I'll deal with it right now, we'll take care of it, and get the job done. Went out and got it done. He worked on the President's, with the President's bipartisan commission on Central America, as I understand you. Yes, he did. You indicated that. He was one of the prime figures in the liberation of Grenada, is that correct? He was, in fact. He helped to plan it? Excuse me? Helped to plan it, helped to carry it out, etc. That's correct. Usually when you have all the different State Department, Department of Defense, and JCS, I think it's fair to say that in this country a lot of people don't agree on things, and I think that Colonel North had a keen sense of being able to coordinate and make people come together to make one
a decisive decision, well, a decision.
Well, he was a decision maker, wasn't he?
He was a good decision maker. He had the ability and the foresight to come to a decision.
Would you say that he was a take-charge guy they turned to quite often?
Yes,
All right, you indicated that he worked on the elimination of the death squad problem in El Salvador.
that's correct.
All right, he worked on the U.S. response to Libya and Colonel Gaddafi.
Yes, he did, tirelessly.
I see. He worked on actions against terrorism against American citizens all over the world. Is that
He
correct?
he was very concerned about terrorism. He never forgot that he had a family at home and that there are other people that had families, and that it wasn't fair to for people to take out their beliefs and take them out on innocent persons.
Well, what you see, are, ostensibly what the public sees, are the ostensible terrorist activities. There are a lot of activities that they have to work on continually behind the scenes as well. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You were aware of that as his secretary.
That's right.
All right. You indicated that he also had daily efforts, made daily efforts, was probably, if not the most concerned person, one of the most concerned persons about the release of American hostages. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Well, you said he handled all kinds of interagency issues, all kinds of public inquiries. There were all kinds of things he did. Is that right?
Yes, Colonel North felt, as I do, that it's important to explain to the American people our policies and for Central America, and many times people used to say, oh, he's talking to a high school, he's taking the time to talk to high school students, and he felt, as I do, if high school students are interested in Central America, that's good, and that someone should tell them about it.
I see. So he would even take time to do things like that.
That's correct.
Well, let me ask you this. From your vantage point, Ms. Hall, really what was it that motivated Colonel North? He is an enigma to many here. Some people, as we know in society, are motivated by money, some by power, some by a genuine desire to serve. Well, how was it that you saw Colonel North in your 4 years of experience working with him?
Definitely a genuine desire to serve and do the best job that he knew how in the best interest of this country.
Well, during all these long hours and late nights that he worked, did it ever appear to you that Colonel North was losing control, that he was becoming irrational or emotionally upset or unable to handle the difficulties and the assignments that he had?
No, sir.
Did you ever see any violent outbursts of temper or anything of that nature at any time?
Absolutely not. Colonel North was very good-natured. He had a great sense of humor, and I think he actually used his sense of humor to sometimes relieve the tension for others in the office. In the middle of a crisis, he'd make a joke, and everybody would smile, and you'd feel like you were normal again. And if anybody lost their temper or lost control, I think it was probably me. I can recount an incident once when we were working very late, and I was, again, late for a date or late for something, and I turned to him and said, I think I've had a nervous breakdown or about to have one, and I said, I'm 24 years old and I can't handle this anymore. I was joking with him, and he said, Hall, he says, you're 24, and I said, see, I've lost 3 years of my life working for you. But this is all in jest, and, I mean, we were human.
Well, there's been some suggestion that Colonel North had some kind of special relationship with Director Casey of the CIA. Now, I've heard your testimony that they spoke on the telephone fairly often and so on, but did you observe any kind of special relationship between the two of them? Did you get the impression that Colonel North was somehow getting his orders from Director Casey rather than from his superiors at the National Security Council?
I don't know, sir.
Okay. You just don't know.
No, I don't know.
But you knew they were close and they chatted often.
Yes.
Okay. You must have seen General Secord in your office on occasion. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
What kind of a working relationship did General Secord have with Colonel North?
I thought that relationship was very good. I never saw any tension between Colonel North or General Secord. I think that they probably were in agreement on almost everything. I think that they both admired each other and their efforts and what they were doing.
Okay, well, I'm on that subject. Let me ask you this. During the period when there was a congressional ban on the funds for the Contras, did Colonel North or General Secord or anyone else, to your knowledge, ever say to you or in your presence or indicate in any way that they were doing anything illegal and that it would need to be kept quiet because it was illegal or improper or even questionable? Do you recall anything like that?
I don't recall anyone saying anything about anything being illegal.
Okay. At the same time, Ms. Hall, would you say it's a fair statement that during the congressional ban on Contra funding, and you know that went off and on and off and on, and sometimes it was for humanitarian, ultimately it became the $100 million for lethal assistance, $70 million for lethal, $30 million for humanitarian. But during all that time of the congressional bans on Contra funding, was there a general feeling in your office that Colonel North's activities were close to the line as far as strict compliance with the law was concerned?
I would say that he was probably walking a fine line. I don't see Colonel North as ever having, I don't think he would cross that line. I don't think so. I mean, I would say that he was walking a fine line in an effort to do what was right.
Well, would you also say that the effort by Colonel North and the rest of the staff with which he worked was to comply with the law as opposed to violating the law?
Definitely.
Okay. Did you ever observe Colonel North do anything for personal gain as opposed to public service?
Absolutely not.
See, in my opinion, one of the major questions that really these hearings have to raise is where is the venality here? Where is the propensity to do something for private gain, or to take a bribe, or to do something that was wrong? Did you ever see anything along those lines?
Sir, I never saw anyone, Ollie North, Colonel North, any of these people motivated by money or personal gain. I saw them motivated by the fact that we had hostages being kept and that they were to help. I mean, this was instilled in me by them, and that's the only thing I could feel.
You seem to be telling us that they had really hard problems to handle, and they were difficult problems, and some of them came close to the line from time to time.
Yes, I would say so.
All right. When you shredded the documents on November 21st, Miss Hall, did Colonel North or Bob Earl or anybody else say why you were to shred those documents?
No, sir.
Did they give you any reason at all?
No, sir.
What was the atmosphere like during the shredding?
Well, it certainly wasn't lock the door, close the windows, and pull down the shades. The door could have been opened at any time, and I wasn't told, please don't tell anyone about this. I just wasn't told that, and I didn't feel like it was. I didn't feel like a closed atmosphere. I mean, like I said before, it wasn't lock the door, pull down the shades type thing.
All right. Nobody was putting tremendous pressure on you or anything like that.
No.
As I understand your testimony, it was on the afternoon of November 25th when you discovered that the altered documents were still on your desk and that you had not finished the job. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And then you called Colonel North at the hotel and told him to get back to the office. So that's right, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And during that conversation, did he say anything about the alterations or the shredding or any other efforts to cover up anything?
No, sir.
After his initial request to make those changes, did he ever follow up or question you or press you to see that the job got done?
No, sir.
With respect to the removal of the documents from your office, do you know if Mr. Green knew that you were taking the documents out of the old executive office building when you were leaving your offices?
I don't know Mr. Green knew that, no.
So, as far as you know, he did not know.
No.
Was Mr. Green present in Colonel North's office when you told Colonel North about the documents?
Mr. Green was in the suite. He was not present in the immediate office where I was with Colonel North.
Okay. Did Mr. Green say anything about the documents at any time?
No, sir.
Did he know what the documents were?
No, sir, and neither did Colonel North.
Did he seem to know anything about the shredding that had gone on?
I believe he must have, since he asked me if I was asked about shredding, what would I say?
Okay. Did he tell you to mislead anybody or to not tell the truth in any way?
He didn't say. All the words I remember is, if you're asked about shredding, what are you going to say? And I knew the answer to that question, and that was, we do shredding every day, and he said good, and there was no further discussion to my recollection.
Okay. Ms. Hall, much has been said lately about Mrs. North's alleged trip to Philadelphia and Colonel North's cashing of some traveler's checks at food stores and gas stations. There have definitely been some impressions left from the introduction of that information. Now, I understand that you have no direct knowledge of these matters, but I would just like to ask you this one question, because I think you are in a unique position to address it. Based on your knowledge and the understanding of the character and personality of Oliver North, do you feel that he at least deserves the right to offer his explanation of these issues before we on these committees or the media or the American public at large draw any conclusions about or any conclusions or opinions about what happened?
I believe he has that right, yes, sir.
I have a couple more questions. Could I have one more minute? Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As to the altering of documents and the shredding, and especially the removal of files from your office, would it be fair to say, Ms. Hall, that you got caught up in the controversial events of the day and you did some things that in hindsight probably were not very smart?
Yes, sir. I have to say that at the time I removed the documents, as I said before, I was emotionally distraught and did not realize the severity of what I was doing.
Do you have a feeling, did you have a feeling at that time, Ms. Hall, that the Iran initiative was secret and that there have been strenuous efforts made to keep it secret?
Absolutely.
Did you have a feeling at that time that the lives of hostages were involved in that operation?
Absolutely.
Did you have a feeling that taken out of context or even perfectly in context, that the widespread dissemination of documents relating to those events could cause some problems?
Yes, sir.
And there again, with respect to the shredding and the other activities, which I have to admit do not look very good, do you feel that regardless of how bad they might look, and I think there are some who have tried to put the worst face on that, and some of them are right here in this room, as a matter of fact, but regardless of how bad they look, do you think that we should wait to hear Colonel North's explanation for those actions before we draw any final conclusions?
I think it would be fair to Colonel North, yes.
Might be fair to everybody concerned, don't you think?
That's correct.
Well, Ms. Hall, just one final thought. I don't know how the account number given to Elliot Abrams got fouled up. And I don't for a second think that you mistyped it. As you said in your opening statement, you can type. It's apparent you're a very bright woman and that you seem to be an excellent secretary. But it strikes me as interesting that if that number had not been transposed, we probably wouldn't be here today.
I have thought about that myself, sir.
Well, the reason I think that is if in the event that $10 million had been put in the right account, there would have been plenty of money for the Contras under those circumstances at that particular time without dipping into any of the funds generated by the Iranian arms sales. So there would have been no diversion. There would have been no press conference by the Attorney General, and we would have been spared all of these public travails. So I think that's an important thing to understand. So I want to thank you again, Ms. Hall. I want to thank the Chairman for allowing me to go on just a little bit longer. I've appreciated your testimony, and I've appreciated having a first-hand account of just what Oliver North is like. I think we'll just all have to see what he has to say before we draw our own conclusions, but I think it's only fair to wait till he says what he has to say and he testifies before us before we draw all those conclusions.
I agree. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Devine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Ms. Hall. Could you give us some indication about, there has been evidence that Ollie North traveled a great deal, and did you handle his reimbursements when he came back? In other words, did you take care of any expenses he might have so that he would get reimbursed from the U.S. government?
When Colonel North returned from a trip, he filled out his own travel voucher. I Xeroxed it, compiled it with the receipts that he had, and passed it to our administrative office to a gentleman by the name of Mike Snedden, who completed the voucher and returned it to Colonel North with a check.
And I assume you did this a number of times, went through this. This was the normal procedure.
Yes, sir.
Did you ever see anything unusual about that?
No.
Any indication at all that you had that he was not being truthful in the expenses he was turning in?
No, sir.
All right. What was his basic attitude towards money? Was this a concern to him? Was he, is he one of these people who is constantly complaining about not having enough money? And again, it's obvious. We're into this. There's been testimony in regard to the traveler's checks. I think it's unfortunate that it was brought out at a point in time in the hearing when he did not have an opportunity and will not have an opportunity for another month to explain it in any way, but that evidence is out. So this committee is very much interested, and I think the American people are, in what motivates Ollie North, what type person he is. You were very close to him, work with him for an extended period of time. What can you tell us and tell the American people about his general attitude about money? Is this a
He
driving
certainly-
force?
I cannot. He certainly was not motivated to do what he did for money. There's no doubt in my mind. Colonel North, I mean, I'm sure he would have liked to have gotten paid for more than, a little lieutenant colonel's salary for what he was doing. I think he definitely deserved to be paid more, but he was a lieutenant colonel in the United States Marine Corps, and he received a salary for that, and he accepted it.
Were you involved in any way in the keeping of a personal checkbook of his or any way connected with his personal finances?
No, sir.
Your testimony was, I believe, that you do not know anything about these traveler's checks that he supposedly cashed. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And that your only contact was the 3 that you received when you were, I guess, going to the beach, and it was late and the banks were closed, and you said, "Do you have any money?" And he said he got the traveler's checks out. But it's my understanding that he told you when he gave you those traveler's checks that that was not his money and that you needed to pay those back. Is that right?
That's my recollection.
All right, and you in fact did pay those traveler's checks back.
Yes,
your
sir.
recollection. Let me, if I could, move to another area. On the date that the Meese press conference took place, November 25th, I believe, when everyone was viewing that, do you recall seeing Tom Green? Do you recall whether Tom Green was there or not?
He was not, sir.
All right. Yesterday you testified, I believe, if I recall correctly, that Oliver North, to your knowledge, never met alone with the President of the United States. Is that correct?
That's my knowledge.
All right. And you're only aware of the one phone call, and that phone call, of course, occurred after he was actually terminated. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. Therefore, your knowledge would not be inconsistent with the White House records if I told you the White House records disclosed the following: that Ollie North never met alone with the President, that in the time that he held this position there were only 2 calls between him and the President. The first was a conference call involving other people, and the second one was the one that you testified to yesterday, and that the President and Ollie North attended the same meeting on 19 separate occasions, never alone, and that there were, during those 19 times, there was never any meeting that had less than a total of 5 people in those meetings. That would not be inconsistent with your knowledge of Oliver North and your knowledge of the contact that the President had with Oliver North, would it?
I would say that would be an accurate description, yes.
All right. You were very close and had the opportunity to work with Mr. North, and I believe you testified he worked exceedingly long hours, and of course you kept very long hours too. What time would you normally leave?
I think an average time would be 8 or 9 o'clock. As I've said before, we've worked much later than that. But on an average, I worked about 12, possibly 14 hours a day.
Would he normally still be working, or would he normally leave about that time?
It depended. He also liked to make sure that I got to my car since it was after dark. So many times I would wait a few 5 minutes or so until he was wrapped up so that he could walk me out to my car. If he was going to be a few more hours, then I would call a White House guard to walk me. I would say that a lot of times he stayed well after I did.
Could you tell us what, the best you can recall, the relationship was between Ollie North and Bud McFarland? How would you describe that relationship?
I would say that they were close, they were friends, and Mr. McFarland was his superior.
All right. And how about Admiral Poindexter?
I would say just about the same.
All right. Comparing the two, who would Ollie North have been closer to?
I would say that he probably was to Mr. McFarland, possibly because Mr. McFarland was, in the United States Marine Corps at one time, and maybe they felt an affection chemistry-wise towards each other that, was special.
During the time that Bud McFarland was the National Security Advisor, how often would you say that Ollie North and Bud McFarland had contact in a day's time? Maybe let's talk about phone calls, and then you can talk about personal meetings.
I would say that Colonel North's contact with Mr. McFarland was just as it was with Admiral Poindexter or any other security advisor. Of course, Colonel North had a lot of contact with the security advisors because of the issues that he worked. I would say that he had more contact with them than perhaps maybe any other staffer, but because of his issues that he handled.
Could you give us some idea, and I know there's no typical day or average day, but could you give us some idea of how often during a day that they would have this contact?
It's hard to give an answer to that, sir. It depends upon if it's a terrorism incident. You could spend hours with the security advisor in the situation room. If there wasn't, it depended on if there's a presidential meeting happening that day, or it depended on if the security advisor called you over because he had a question. You were always at his disposal.
Let me move to Albert Hakim. How often did you see Albert Hakim?
I believe I know I met Albert Hakim once, and I believe I've seen him maybe 2 or 3 times.
All right. He was not a frequent visitor to Ollie North's office?
No, sir.
All right. How about phone calls between the two? I believe that you normally place Mr. North's phone calls. Is that correct, Colonel North's phone calls?
Yes, sir.
All right. How often would he and Mr. Hakim have had contact?
I would say they were frequent, but not as frequent as they were with General Secord.
What would frequent be? Would you have any idea?
I'm trying to recall.
Again, I know that's tough. There's no typical day.
No,
and
there
I
isn't.
fully understand that. We appreciate that.
Like I've said, I think he might have come to the office a few times. The calls were more than the visits, definitely. I would say they were, it's hard to describe. They, like I've said before, to give you a comparison, they were definitely not as frequent as General Secord's. General Secord was a daily caller, whereas Albert Hakim was not. And during the time that Albert Hakim worked with us, maybe...
Once a week?
Possibly, maybe less.
About Rob Owen. Did you see Rob Owen in your office?
Yes, sir.
And again, with him, how often during the period of time that he was involved with Colonel North? This be once a week, less than that, more than that?
I would say he was a frequent visitor, maybe once a week. It depended. There were spurts. Maybe once a week, then it might not be for a while. And then again, maybe 2 or 3 times in a week.
All right. What about phone calls with Rob Owen?
I think the visits were probably more, there were more visits than there were phone calls.
More visits than there were phone
Yes.
calls? All right. What about Ambassador Tams? Did he ever call, or did Ollie North ever place any calls to the ambassador?
Ambassador Tams and Ollie were close friends. I would say that wasn't frequent, but there were calls.
Again, would this be once a week, more or less?
No, I would not say once a week. I would say it depended upon if something had come up. It was not once a week.
But you would categorize them as close friends?
Yes, sir.
What about going back to Rob Owen? How would you describe the relationship between Ollie North and Rob Owen?
I think that they became close friends.
Albert Hakim?
I don't know the relationship there. I don't know Mr. Hakim very well, sir.
Let me move on to Elliot Abrams. How would you describe the relationship between Ollie North and Elliot Abrams?
I would say that there was a good relationship. I think that they admired each other. The meetings, I would say that he met with Elliot Abrams once a week because there was an interagency meeting once a week that Mr. North attended. The phone calls outside of the meetings were not that frequent. I don't think, I mean, it's hard for me to judge. I place the calls, but again, I do not place the secure calls for Colonel North, so it's hard to judge. I could be wrong when I give you a description.
Did you ever see Elliot Abrams in your office?
Yes, sir.
And how often would that occur?
I think it's only been a few times. And it possibly was because he was in a meeting at the White House and stopped over to say hello, or I think he might have been in the office for a meeting at one point. I don't remember what the meeting was.
Would you describe Elliot Abrams and Colonel North as being close then?
I would say so, yes.
What about Mr. Coy and Mr. Earl? Can you describe the working relationship inside your office between those two and Colonel North?
The relationship was good.
All right. Who did what? What was the relationship as far as the pecking order, or as far as the...
Colonel North was, in my eyes, the boss. He was the director. Craig Coy and Bob Earl came from the Vice President's Task Force on Terrorism to join us when the office was expanded to take on those responsibilities. I would say that everyone was friends. We worked well together. It was a great team. I would say that Craig Coy handled probably more terrorism issues as far as airport security, et cetera, et cetera. Bob handled terrorism also. It was a mixed thing. There was no designated areas for which each person handled. It was whenever an issue came up and somebody was available, they took care of it. Bob, I think, probably had a little bit slightly closer relationship with Ollie because he was in the Marine Corps, and I believe that they knew each other before they came to Colonel Orr came to work at our office. And Bob had also stayed late hours. I mean, Craig did too, but Bob, I'd be kicking him out of the office just like I was trying to do Ollie all the time.
Okay. With the exception of the testimony you've already given about the times that Tom Green that you saw him, was he in Ollie North's office, in your office, prior to this series of events in November when the press conference was held and then the subsequent events? Was he someone you knew before then at all?
I never met Mr. Green until November 25th, 1986. We did place phone calls to him, and he in turn called us. But the first time I ever laid eyes on Tom Green was November 25th.
When would these phone calls have started?
I know that we were talking to Tom Green prior to May of 1986. That's my kind of standing point there. I would say
How do you know
sometime
that?
in late 85.
Late 85.
Possibly. I mean, could be wrong, but
Why do you peg it to the May date?
May is the Tehran trip and also when we moved, so I can remember being in room 392 and certain things happening, and I can also see myself in 302 and certain things happening, so that's how I decipher between the two.
Okay.
You know, for giving a time frame.
Beginning at that period, would these phone calls have been very frequent? Once a week?
It varied. It could be once a week, twice a week. It might not be for 2 weeks. It might not be for a month. It was varied.
All right. Adolfo Calero, how often would you see him, or did you see him?
More, I would say probably in 1985, 84 and 85, I guess. Not as often in 86.
How would you describe the relationship between him and Ollie North?
Good.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, we begin now under the 5-minute rule. The chair recognizes Senator Rudman, the vice chairman.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Before I ask Ms. Hall a few questions, I just want to get the record straight on something. I think my colleague from Utah, Senator Hatch, makes a very good point, and all of us in this committee have tried assiduously to avoid casting any aspersions of guilt or innocence on anyone. That is not our job, and certainly before people appear. But so that anybody watching might not misunderstand, we have wanted Colonel North here since last January. Colonel North's not being here to answer these charges is his choice, not ours. And I would say it's his legal choice, and I'm not critical of that. He has every right as an American citizen to invoke his constitutional privileges. That's what this country's all about. But let the record show that the reason Colonel North is still a mystery man is because he hasn't been before this committee for a whole lot of reasons. Some having to do with his wishing to take immunity, others having to do with the independent counsel wanting more time. But I think it's important that the American people don't misunderstand that we're not kind of holding Colonel North out in the corridor and letting people make statements about him before we hear from him ourselves. I wish we had heard Colonel North, Mr. Chairman, last February, and Admiral Poindexter. I have made it very clear that when it came to balancing the interests of this country on prosecution versus getting the cloud out from over the president? We should have had them here months ago. I stand by that position. Some people disagree, but I believe it. But that's why he's not here. Ms. Hall, thank you very much for being so candid in your testimony. I don't have any real factual problems with your testimony. I want to just clear up some things that I don't understand. I want to get to Mr. Green for just a moment. Let me describe the situation as this transcript in your deposition indicates it so we understand fully Mr. Green's participation. As I understand it, you left the office with some documents in your boots and in your back to behind your back, as you described it. You walked out of the building. You wanted to maybe remove the documents at that point. Mr. Green, I believe, told you, no, don't pass them to me here or to Colonel North here. Is that correct?
I don't believe he used those words, sir.
Well, what did he say?
When I was at the elevator, he said, why don't you just wait for a few minutes? Or, let's see, let me...
Well, that's good. That's fine.
I'm just trying to remember what I had remembered him saying. And we walked outside. Tom said, why don't you wait until we get in the car?
So, Colonel, that's Mr. Green you're speaking of, not
Mr.
Colonel.
Green, yes, I'm sorry.
So at that point, Mr. Green knew that you had documents on your person.
We would have to assume so. I don't know.
I certainly assume so, Ms. Hall. And then you get outside, and you want again to then get rid of the documents. The reason you wanted to do that is because you were going to your car, which is in the garage. Is that not correct?
Yes.
But you didn't go to your car. You went to Mr. Green's car, which is parked on the sidewalk for the specific purpose of getting in the car so people couldn't observe, which was their idea, and pass the document.
No, sir, that's not true.
All right, well, you tell me what is then.
I'll tell you what is. Colonel North came to the office. I asked him if he could see documents in my back. He said no. We walked out of the office. I gestured to give him the documents. He said, no, just wait till we get outside. I walk outside. I motioned again to get the documents. Tom Green says, no, wait till we get in the car. There is no way that I could have known, or that there is no way that they set that up. It was a convenient place to park, sir. It's on G Street. It's in the evening. It's a convenient place. It wasn't set up, to my knowledge, and I don't depict it that way, as a conspiracy to rush me out of the office and into the car to give them the documents.
Ms. Hall,
And in fact, I don't know that Colonel North actually knew that I had the documents on my person when I was talking to him on the phone.
well, you're looking way beyond my question. I don't allege a conspiracy. I think the only thing I'm trying to establish is that Mr. Green knew when you got into his car that you had documents on your person. Is that true?
I would say that he knew, yes.
And then you proceeded to remove documents from your boots and from other parts of your clothing. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
And you handed those documents to Colonel North or Mr. Green?
I handed them to Colonel North.
And Mr. Green was aware of that transfer of those documents?
Yes, he was.
And I guess we can say, in fairness to everyone, that it is not normal to take documents out of the White House in one's boots and clothing. So Mr. Green certainly realized that there was something that was being concealed that was being taken out of the White House.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I had one question about your testimony yesterday, and it wasn't followed up, I don't believe. I've checked the transcript. When you found Colonel North shredding the documents that afternoon, the transcript says as follows, quote, I asked if I should shred prof notes and phone logs. He said I should probably go ahead. Do you recall saying that yesterday?
Yes, sir.
All right. Could you explain to the committee, because it wasn't followed up, what was it about the prof notes and phone logs that on your own volition you suggested to Colonel North, observing shredding going on, that those documents should be shredded also?
Sir, I have testified prior to this that I had my own motives in the beginning for trying to shred those prof's notes and phone logs because they were taking up room in the file. They had become numerous, and we had, as you know, Barbara Brown had joined us, and the file had become very full, and there was no room for me to put my things. I had been thinking about doing that in the past, and when the shredding incident started, I not only found them to take up room in the safe, but I also found them, in my own opinion, to be revealing of as far as conversations between Colonel North and other people, which I felt in my mind were private.
So you were aware of the contents of certain prof notes and phone logs, generally, not specifically, but generally.
Generally, that they were. It's like a phone call. I mean, it's like taping a phone call and having those on record. I just don't feel that that's their private conversation.
And since the Attorney General of the United States had just said that things had gone wrong and people were getting fired, it was the general feeling in the office that those things ought not to be preserved.
I did not know that, sir.
You were not aware of that at that time?
No, I was not.
Last question I have has to do with the removal of the documents themselves. The ones that you went up to Colonel Earl's office, I believe, on the second floor, and secreted some of those in your back, as you put it, in your boots. And what was it about those documents that gave you such grave concern?
As I've said before, sir, they included the copies of the altered documents, which I felt might not be discovered if I took copies of them out, since they were old documents, and spread the originals out throughout the pile. They wouldn't be found together, and copies wouldn't be found. So I took the copies. Prof's notes, as I've said before, I thought were private conversations. They had been shredded before, and I wanted to get rid of them again. The minutes I felt were accurate description of what went on in the meetings with the moderates in Iran, and I just felt that the whole Iran initiative was being blown out, and I just felt that they were very revealing, and I took them out. This was done in an emotional, distraught manner. I was very upset.
Oh, we understand that, Ms. Hall, and no one's being critical.
And I was not thinking clearly. Prof's notes, not only were, the hard copies were destroyed, but if I had been thinking clearly, they're also, how do I know that Mr. McFarland or John Poindexter or others on the staff have not deleted those prof notes on their machines? They don't even have to have a hard copy. What I'm trying to explain to you is I was not thinking clearly.
Right. And Congressman Stokes, when he described it, he called it a cover-up, and you corrected him and said, I did not look at it as a cover-up. I looked at it as protecting.
That's correct.
Who are you protecting it from?
I was protecting the initiative.
From whom?
From everyone, because I felt that I knew that we were trying to get back the hostages, and I also knew that we were dealing with moderates, and if this whole thing is exposed, there could be people whose lives could be lost.
Well,
and I also felt that it divulges, if this thing breaks out, we're sitting up here talking about all kinds of things. We're revealing sources, we're revealing everything. In my opinion, I don't think this is...
Well, I would observe, Ms. Hall, that it was the
I just
FBI...
felt there would be a lot of damage done if a lot of top-secret, sensitive, classified material was exposed in public so that the Soviets, everyone else could read it. That's how I felt.
Ms. Hall, did you know that it was White House personnel that were standing in the office barring people from leaving? You did know that.
I knew it was an NSC official, yes.
Well, it wasn't the KGB that was coming, Ms. Hall. It was the FBI.
That's true, sir. But we do in this country have a tendency to have classified documents get on the front page of the New York Times and other, excuse me, I didn't mean to say that, but other newspapers in general. Sorry about that. I didn't mean...
Ms. Hall, I want to tell you that I have read your deposition. I want to thank you and your attorney for being forthright. This has got to be a very difficult time for someone like you. I think that you've done us a service by coming forward. This has not been easy for you or for the committee because you were caught in the middle of something, and we thank you for your testimony.
I appreciate your comments, sir.
Mr. Cheney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hall, I'd like to follow up just briefly on the security question. Obviously, when you work in the West Wing on the NSC, there are certain security procedures that are standard for everybody. Everybody's always cautioned to be very careful about what they discuss. Everybody receives a full field investigation before they're employed and is briefed into those programs they need to have access to. Isn't that true?
Yes, sir.
And it's not at all abnormal to have burning and shredding. That's a standard practice just to destroy information that you don't want to throw in a wastebasket, which someone might read that's sensitive.
Yes, sir.
Can you describe for us the guidance you received from Colonel North with respect to the security procedures you were to follow in your job? Were there anything out of the ordinary?
No, sir. I had worked for the government for 10 years, and I have worked with classified material. I know what to do.
And the procedures that you followed in Colonel North's office were the same that you followed at the Pentagon or anywhere else?
Yes, sir.
What I'm trying to find out, Ms. Hall, is were you, by virtue of the very sensitive nature of the activities Colonel North was involved in, given any extra special guidance from him as to how you should function?
No, sir. I think he recognized that I was a very loyal secretary and loyal to him and also my country.
Okay. Let me come back, if I can, for just a moment to the point that Mr. DeWine raised. He asked about Colonel North's relationships with Admiral Poindexter and Colonel McFarland. I'd like to explore for a moment, if I can, his working relationship in terms of his style of operation. We all know that there are people who, when given direction by a superior, will follow explicitly through step by step to undertake a certain task. There are others who demonstrate initiative. Assigned a problem, they'll go out on their own and find creative ways of addressing the problem. And there may be a third category, say those who don't wait to receive an assignment but identify a problem and develop a course of action and then try to persuade their superiors to pursue that course of action. Can you comment on which of those models Colonel North would fit most closely with?
I would say probably the latter, if that is that he was creative and that, like I said before, he never gave up. There was always a means to achieve a goal. I don't believe that my opinion, that he would do anything without authorization.
Well, do you perceive a conflict there at all? In terms of the showing and demonstrating initiative on the one hand and on the other hand waiting for authorization to undertake an activity?
I don't see a conflict, no. I think they can work hand in hand.
Did you ever have the sense that he was developing policy options and then taking those to his superiors, to Mr. McFarland or Mr. Poindexter, trying to persuade them to pursue that course of action?
I would say that he developed ideas in order to overcome barriers and to find a means. Yes, I would say that he was creative in his work, and I would say that maybe his policies were accepted and authorized many times.
Are you aware of any policy options he developed that were turned down?
I don't remember ever seeing a disapproved memorandum. Colonel North, in fact, never sent information memorandums. He always sent an action memorandum.
And every single action memorandum he ever sent was always approved?
To the best of my recollection, I never remember seeing a disapproved memorandum. There possibly could have come one back, maybe not marked at all. I think, as we've seen from Admiral Poindexter's, with a notation of some kind. In my recollection, the 4 years I worked for Oliver North, I never saw a disapproved memorandum.
Would he have ever submitted action memorandum, to anyone other than Admiral Poindexter or Colonel McFarland?
He also worked for William Clark. Directly from him, I don't believe so.
So in other words, the only memoranda you ever typed for or have any knowledge of would have gone directly from Colonel North to either whoever the National
Yes.
Security Advisor was at the time. And secondly, it's your testimony that none of those were ever disapproved, that you don't recall that any were ever disapproved.
That's correct.
A final question, and you made some reference to this earlier. Do you have any reason to doubt that Colonel North had authority for everything he did as an employee of the National Security Council?
If he had authority for everything he did?
Did he ever undertake any activity without the knowledge of his superiors or without the approval of his superiors, to your knowledge?
I don't, in my opinion, I don't believe he did so, no.
Thank you.
Chair will interrupt the questioning just to announce to members that the State Department has advised us that Mr. Hakim's KL-43 communication device is now in the possession of the United States government at our mission in Geneva. Mr. Stokes and others were interested in that, and I thought the members would like to know.
Senator McClure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to focus for a few minutes on the origination of policy, which I believe is part of what this committee is supposed to be looking at. And yesterday, you testified that you first learned about the Iran initiative with a visit by David Kimchi in the summer of '85. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Was that a visit to Colonel North or a visit to Mr. McFarland?
My recollection is that I believe, and I could be wrong, but my recollection is that I believe Mr. Kimchi came to our office first and just as a holding room until Mr. McFarland was ready to see him.
Have you ever met Mr. Kimchi before?
No, sir.
Do you know whether Colonel North knew him before?
I don't believe he did, sir. I don't know.
Had there been phone calls before that time?
No, sir.
And he did meet with Colonel North?
My understanding of him being in our office was as a holding room. I don't know if they had words. I don't know.
I assume that Mr. McFarland contacted Colonel North and told him of the meeting. Is that correct?
I would have to think of how it was arranged. I thought Mr. Kimchi was, and I could be wrong, was introduced by Mr. Ledeen. I'm not sure. So I believe that maybe Michael might have worked with us in saying, let's get a meeting with Mr. McFarland. Mr. Kimchi came to the office as a holding room and then went to see Mr. McFarland. I could be wrong on that, but that's my recollection.
Were there any discussions in the office about the meeting with Mr. Kimchi after the meeting took place?
I don't sit in discussions. I don't know, sir.
You didn't overhear any?
I don't remember. That was a long time ago. I just don't remember.
You testified yesterday that you knew Mr. Ledeen, that he visited the office frequently.
Yes,
Is that
sir.
correct? Further, you stated that he came to the office to read, that he was there for a reading purpose. In addition to the daily and monthly DIA terrorism summaries, what else was Mr. Ledeen allowed to read?
I think he was authorized to read certain files, perhaps when there was a terrorist incident, and how we reacted to it, and just overall how the incident was taken care of. I mean, that would be pertinent to him, since he was considered to be a terrorism expert as a consultant to the NSC, that he would need to see those files.
How long had you known Mr. Ledeen?
I met Mr. Ledeen when he came to visit Colonel North. I understand that he was on with General Haig, but I'm trying to remember, I guess probably in '84.
Do you know of his background or anything about him personally?
I have read things. I have read articles, and I do know him as a friend.
Are you aware of any other NSC consultants who are allowed access to this information?
I don't believe so, sir.
In addition to his reading appointments, how often did Mr. Ledeen meet with Colonel North personally?
Colonel North was usually very busy, and a lot of times Michael Wood would like to have had to sit down and had a chat with Colonel North, but he was unavailable. I don't know that they really had a lot of meetings together. I think that Mr. Ledeen mostly came to the office to read.
And
I mean, they did have chats every once in a while when Colonel North was there, but a lot of times Mr. Ledeen would have, like I said, liked to have seen him, but Mr. Colonel North was unavailable.
And phone calls?
The phone calls that came in basically were to say, hey, I'm going to stop by today and read. And there might have been a few others in addition to that where he did talk with Colonel North.
Is that from the time of, when did that first start?
I don't know, maybe 1985, possibly late '84. I just don't remember, sir. The calendar would reflect the first time Mr. Ledeen came to visit the office.
Would he call or visit once a week?
He would call to be cleared in to come read. It might be once every 2 weeks, might be once a month. It varied. Mr. Ledeen, I believe, also traveled and did other things besides his capacity as terrorism expert to NSC.
but he was a consultant to the NSC on the basis of his expertise as a terrorism expert.
That's correct.
If it's any comfort to you, I appreciated your comments a moment ago about the fact that we seem to talk too much and that too much appears on the front pages of the newspapers. And you apologize for saying the New York Times. I suspect they wear that as a garland of honor, that you identified them. I don't think they're offended by it. But I do feel, as you do, that we oftentimes expose too much of our nation's secrets and that there is a reason for us to withhold some information from public scrutiny. And I can understand a motivation on the part of people who have very sensitive information to withhold that. Unfortunately, we often honor that in the breach more than in the observance, the necessity for protection of the nation's secrets and for the methods and the means by which we obtain those secrets. I know that Senator Boren feels very strongly on behalf of the Intelligence Committee that that has been true in the past with respect to congressional sources as well. And I think that's a serious question we should ask ourselves as a nation, is whether the good that comes out of hearings like this outweigh the damage that comes out of hearings like this.
I strongly agree, sir.
And thank you very much for your concern.
Thank you.
Mr. Fasell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hall, let me ask the question this way. The shredding started on November 21st, as I understand it from your testimony.
Yes, sir.
And Colonel North was already shredding.
My recollection, sir, is that I think he began shredding and I joined him. If he gets up here and says it happened a different way,
Right.
I don't deny it. That's just my recollection.
No, I understand. I'm not.
Okay.
I didn't have any ulterior motive except to maybe get your concurrence that you wouldn't want us to think that that was just normal routine shredding and office procedures.
We do shred every day, but we do not shred in the volume that we did that day. You're correct.
So something happened that day that stirred up the hormones as far as Colonel North is concerned to want to get rid of some documents. What do you think it was?
I do not know, sir.
It wasn't because Bill Casey was testifying before the Senate Intelligence Committee?
I don't know.
You don't know. You didn't get a phone call that
I don't
started
know.
all of this?
I wasn't aware that I had no feelings in me prior to the shredding incident that it was going to happen. I don't know why it happened. I don't know what triggered it. I don't know what the motives were.
But you were in your protective mode and you decided that the enterprise or whatever it was should be protected and you were perfectly willing to help.
Absolutely.
At that time, did you know that an order had been issued to the Attorney General to investigate this whole matter?
No, I did not, sir.
Do you know whether Colonel North knew?
I have no idea.
You've already testified at length about copies and availability of documents. Were you sure in your own mind that the kind of shredding that was going on would eliminate the documents?
I did not think it would.
Did you say so to Colonel North?
There was a comment I made, and I'm not sure who I made to. My recollection is I made it to Colonel Earl when I was past the TRW or KL-43 traffic messages that he passed me to shred. I think I turned to them and said something along the lines of, if the idea is to get rid of all these things, it's going to be impossible. And he said, oh, there was no concern. There wasn't like, oh my God, you're right, or anything like that. This was a very relaxed atmosphere. It wasn't a tense, like I said, close the door, lock the windows, pull down the shades. It wasn't that atmosphere.
Was there any discussion about who you were keeping the documents from?
No, sir.
Was there any particular person that you felt was more sensitive than any other person who might be included in the documents?
That's a hard question to answer. I don't know.
But you have a feeling.
No.
They were all
Of course, there are people that are more important than others, perhaps, but I just don't know. I would have to answer that and think about it. I mean, think about it and answer it.
Thank you very much.
Senator Sarbanes?
Ms. Hall, on that Friday, the 21st of November, when you had this shredding effort in the office, did you leave afterwards? Is that when your day ended and you went home?
I believe so, sir. I don't know what I did on November 21st after I left the office, or when I left it. I don't recall.
You don't recall what time you left on that day?
No, sir.
But was the shredding the last thing that you did before you left?
I don't recall, sir. I'm sure it probably wasn't. I probably typed Colonel North's card, 3x5 card, explaining his day for Monday. It was probably the last thing I did that day.
But when you interrupted altering the originals and eliminating the copies, that enterprise, in order to do the shredding, is that correct?
That's my memory.
And when you finished the shredding, you did not go back to working on eliminating traces of the altered originals. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that was my mistake, but I have to, in somewhat my defense, I have to say that the office was extremely busy. I mean, the phone calls, the phone is ringing every 3 minutes. It's a very hectic environment.
Well, I'm not sure it's your mistake, because if one takes the view that altering the originals shouldn't have been done in the first place, then at least the mistake was not compounded by you returning to it. Let me ask you,
I'd like to add that I also did not know the urgency, quite the urgency of these documents, because I had no idea that Colonel North would be fired on Tuesday. I didn't know the extreme urgency of this, and I don't know that Colonel North knew it either.
Now, when you came back to the office on Monday, had it been secured at that point?
No, it had not.
When was the office secured and access to files denied to the people who worked there?
Tuesday, November 25th, I would say when Brenda Rieger came in, and my account of that is at around 4 o'clock.
4 o'clock in the afternoon on Tuesday.
Yes, sir.
Now, did any shredding take place on Monday or on Tuesday up till 4 o'clock? Any additional shredding?
Not to my knowledge, sir.
And when you left the office on Tuesday with Colonel North and Mr. Green, were briefcases inspected as you left the office?
Yes, they were, sir.
And did Colonel North have a briefcase?
I believe he did, sir.
Did Mr. Green?
I don't recall.
Was Mr. Green there when this inspection was taking place as you all were leaving?
Mr. Green entered the office with Colonel North. They were there for only maybe 4 or 5 minutes at the most, as Colonel North took a phone call, and then he left. He was there while Brenda Rieger and Bill Van Horn were there. Yes, he was there when they were there.
So
but
go ahead.
he was there for about 5 minutes.
So he realized the office had been secured, did he not?
I assume that he did. I don't know for sure. I would assume that he knew who the people were. I don't know.
Now, on these originals that were altered by you, that was done pursuant to a marked up copy that was given to you by Colonel North, is that correct?
A marked up original, yes, sir.
So he had written in hand on it the revisions that he wanted, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
For instance, if you would turn to exhibit number 5. On on the third page of that exhibit, where it says recommendation, and then it says that the current donors be approached to provide 15 to 20 million additional between now and June 1, 1985. That's what the original said. Then if you would turn to 5A, the recommendation has been changed to read that you brief the President on the current situation and urge concerted action on immediate congressional approval of a $14 million CIA supplemental and 75 to 100 million for next fiscal year. So that's a complete change in the recommendation, is it not?
Yes, sir.
And Colonel North did that by handing you the original and having marked out what was there and written in this revision. Is that how it happened?
I believe so, sir.
And you realized at the time, I take it, that the recommendation was being changed significantly.
As I've said before, I don't have a specific recollection of the changes that were made. They're now very obvious to me since they have been pointed out and described in detail. At the time, I'm sure when I was typing it, knew I was changing the recommendation, but as I've testified before, I did not know the substance of the changes. If I had, I wouldn't have left the attachments on the other document. I was typing, I was changing, I was printing off, I was Xeroxing. That was my job, and I wasn't reading or trying to find out what his motives were or what he was trying to hide or what he was trying to... I was purely a typist, sir.
Well, but Colonel North, on the document he gave you, had scratched out the recommendation and written in a different recommendation. Is that correct?
I believe he probably did, sir.
And that's what you typed on the altered original?
Yes, sir.
And then you checked on the altered original.
Yes, sir.
Approval, which had not appeared on the original. Is that correct?
It could be, sir, that the copy that we have in our exhibit is a copy of the original, but not a copy of the acted upon original. What I'm trying to say, sir, is that an original might go across the street and it certainly came back with an action taken on it, but that copy of the completed memorandum might not have been Xeroxed and placed in our files. So what you have here in Exhibit 5 might not be the original acted upon document. I mean, I'm sure that a System 4 document did not come back without any action taken on it.
All right, but with all
and as I've said before, I don't ever remember seeing a disapproved document that Colonel North wrote.
But with all of these documents, what happened is Colonel North handed you the original marked up for retyping with his changes placed on that original. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Broomfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hall, I want to join the other members of the committee in congratulating you on how candid and forthright you've been in answering the questions. I think you've been an extremely valuable and good witness.
Thank you, sir.
And I'm sure that our good friend Ali probably is watching, and his family. And I bet they can't help but be very proud of your loyalty and dedication to him during the past 4 years that you worked for him. You have known him a long time, and from your close-up view, did you believe he was unquestionably dedicated to the President Reagan and what he stood for in foreign policy?
There's no doubt in my mind, sir.
Do you think, Ms. Hall, that Colonel North would conscientiously engage in conduct which he believed, if found out, would jeopardize the President in any way or the policies in the best interest of our country?
Absolutely not.
Ms. Hall, I wanted you to know, because there's been a lot said here, if we could only get Colonel North here, a lot of this could be over in a hurry. Well, there's a lot of us on this panel, or several of us, have been trying to get him up here for a long time. We wanted to give him immunity right off the bat. Well, it didn't work that way for two reasons. First of all, there are a lot of members on this committee who didn't want to give him immunity. And probably the second reason was independent counsel Walsh didn't want to give immunity. He still doesn't want to give immunity to Colonel North. And this committee only granted him immunity last week, and it wasn't unanimous. So that there has been a problem in getting immunity to him, which I think he's entitled to. We're not going to get the full story until we have Colonel North and probably Admiral Poindexter before this committee to hear what they have to say about the entire matter. Wouldn't you agree?
I agree. I'd like to add that maybe someone might like to read The Man in the Arena by Theodore Roosevelt. I think it depicts the situation correctly.
Now, you remember a time when terrorists hijacked the Achilles Laurel. Can you tell us what you know about Colonel North's involvement in forcing down the Achilles Laurel terrorist?
I don't know details, but I know that he was very effective in, as some people have referred to, hijacking the hijackers of the Achilles Laurel. His roles in terrorist incidents were extensive, and he was, I consider, a central figure and an effective player.
Well, I thank you for that. I think Senator Hatch has asked you many of the questions that I wanted to ask of you, and you've answered very fully. Again, I want to compliment you on your appearance here before our panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to use this as a debating forum for members of Congress of this panel, but I find it hard to accept the proposition that anyone of Colonel Oliver North's position as not only a uniformed military officer, but the position he held is entitled to immunity. I don't think he's entitled to anything. We're granting him immunity because we want to get all the evidence, but I don't think that anyone should be in a position of asserting that they are entitled to immunity. And that's just my particular view here, and not that necessarily of the other members, but I thought I should take a moment to express that. Ms. Hall, you indicated that you were part of the team. My question is, what team?
A part of the National Security Council team, sir.
And would that team include Colonel North?
Absolutely.
Did it include General Secord?
General Secord was working with us in an effort to...
Colonel Dutton?
Yes.
Albert Hakim?
Yes, so these were people we were working with.
Colonel Earl?
When I referred to the team, as I did before, that reference was concerning our office, not the entire people we work with throughout the departments of the U.S. government and everyone we came in contact, sir. I'm talking about a team within our office.
And that's why you felt that you should help in participating in the shredding of the documents that was part of the team effort that day.
I, sir, was a secretary to Colonel North. I was acting as a secretary when I participated in the shredding.
You indicated it was not your policy to ask any questions. If Ms. Napier had handed you $16,000 in cash and asked you to turn that over to Colonel North, would you have asked any questions then?
No, sir.
So that would not have raised any questions in your mind?
As I've said before, and I'll repeat it again, I believe that Colonel North was doing what was right, and I have worked for him for 4 years and never seen any unusual or suspecting any foul play or bad characteristics in him. And therefore, that's why I felt that I need not question someone I admired and respected.
So as long as you believe that what he felt was right and you believe in what he was doing is right, you would never question anything that he might do to carry that out?
Sir, I believed in what we were doing within the office. I'm not going to say I won't question him on anything that he might do. I believed in our efforts within our office.
Colonel North during the time that you were employed?
I think we can use the term alter when we're
Change.
talking about originals. When I'm referring to, I've changed many documents in my 4 years.
Fine. But did you ever have occasion to change documents that were over a year old?
I don't remember ever doing that before, sir. This is the only occasion I remember doing such.
I'm going to relieve you of a terrible burden that Senator Hatch, I think, placed upon your shoulders. He suggested that perhaps that your transposition of those numbers of that account may have led to the unraveling and the exposure of this event.
I don't believe he did that, sir.
Well, I think it was intimated that somehow, had those numbers never been transposed, that it never would have been discovered and the event would have continued as is. And
I think he made a point to say that he was not saying that I did it. I think that point was made by Senator Hatch, and I appreciate it.
The point I'd like to make is I think the moment we became involved with Mr. Ghorbanifar and his coterie of friends, that this particular initiative was doomed to exposure. And I think that once the second channel was opened up, that we certified or cemented the fact that this was going to ultimately be exposed as it was. So I didn't want you or Senator Hatch to feel that somehow the transposition of those two numbers may have unraveled this entire initiative. I think it's quite to the contrary. I also, Ms. Hall, I think that everybody here is aware of your particular qualities. You are extremely dedicated, intensely loyal to Colonel North and others. And as a matter of fact, you have something else which most employers look for. That's what I would call contextual intelligence. I think it's not simply, as you describe yourself, as a typist and a mere secretary. You understand, as you're typing, the context in which these statements are being made. And I think that's an admirable quality that we all look for, but it's not simply a typist that you were serving at. I'd like also to point out you did something which I found quite commendable. During the course of the day, when Colonel Earl came over to offer assistance, you said at that point, I don't have your exact language, but I can get it from the transcript, no need for you to become involved in this. And I assume at that point you felt that since you and Colonel North were intimately involved at that point with that particular effort to either the shredding of the documents or the taking out of the documents, you at least tried to say two of the members of the team involved in this are enough. And you, I think in a very noble gesture, precluded him from giving you that kind of assistance so that you would take that responsibility yourself.
I don't think those were my motives. I think the reason I said that was because, in fact, it was my idea to do the documents. It was not Bob Earl's.
It was your idea to do what?
It was my idea to remove the documents, not Bob Earl's. It was my initiative to do that, and I felt that if I dreamed that up, or if I was the one that initiated that I should be the one to do it.
And no need for him to become involved in that.
That's correct.
You knew at that particular point that you were engaged in something that might lead to some further difficulties, did you not?
I did. As I've said before, I was emotionally distraught. I was upset by the fact that this could all come out. I mean, I was protecting the initiative. I was protecting, in my sense, the country, too.
But wasn't Colonel Earl part of the team who was also engaged in that whole operation?
Colonel Earl was involved in the shredding. He had no knowledge of the alternative documents. He knew nothing about them. He knew that I had not taken out the copies. He didn't know anything about that. All he was aware of is that there had been shredding taking place, and he participated.
One final question, if I can, Mr. Chairman. Senator Sarbanes asked you, as you were typing along, when you were changing some of the documents, I think you indicated that you were simply serving as a typist at that point. But you did testify yesterday that you had enough of an awareness, again I call it contextual intelligence, to know that you couldn't imitate John Poindexter's handwriting, so therefore you simply... Now, you altered some documents. I think you indicated to Congressman Stokes that you altered many documents for Colonel North during the time that you were employed.
I think we can use the term alter when we're talking about originals. When I'm referring to, I've changed many documents in my 4 years.
Fine. But did you ever have occasion to change documents that were over a year old?
I don't remember ever doing that before, sir. This is the only occasion I remember doing such.
I'm going to relieve you of a terrible burden that Senator Hatch, I think, placed upon your shoulders. He suggested that perhaps that your transposition of those numbers of that account may have led to the unraveling and the exposure of this event.
I don't believe he did that, sir.
Well, I think it was intimated that somehow, had those numbers never been transposed, that it never would have been discovered and the event would have continued as is. And
I think he made a point to say that he was not saying that I did it.
Well,
I think that point was made by Senator Hatch, and I appreciate it.
The point I'd like to make is I think the moment we became involved with Mr. Ghorbanifar and his coterie of friends, that this particular initiative was doomed to exposure. And I think that once the second channel was opened up, that we certified or cemented the fact that this was going to ultimately be exposed as it was. So I didn't want you or Senator Hatch to feel that somehow the transposition of those two numbers may have unraveled this entire initiative. I think it's quite to the contrary. I also, Ms. Hall, I think that everybody here is aware of your particular qualities. You are extremely dedicated, intensely loyal to Colonel North and others. And as a matter of fact, you have something else which most employers look for. That's what I would call contextual intelligence. I think it's not simply, as you describe yourself, as a typist and a mere secretary. You understand, as you're typing, the context in which these statements are being made. And I think that's an admirable quality that we all look for, but it's not simply a typist that you were serving at. I'd like also to point out you did something which I found quite commendable. During the course of the day, when Colonel Earl came over to offer assistance, you said at that point, I don't have your exact language, but I can get it from the transcript, no need for you to become involved in this. And I assume at that point you felt that since you and Colonel North were intimately involved at that point with that particular effort to either the shredding of the documents or the taking out of the documents, you at least tried to say two of the members of the team involved in this are enough. And you, I think in a very noble gesture, precluded him from giving you that kind of assistance so that you would take that responsibility yourself.
I don't think those were my motives. I think the reason I said that was because, in fact, it was my idea to do the documents. It was not Bob Earl's.
It was your idea to do what?
It was my idea to remove the documents, not Bob Earl's. It was my initiative to do that, and I felt that if I dreamed that up, or if I was the one that initiated that I should be the one to do it.
And no need for him to become involved in that.
That's correct.
You knew at that particular point that you were engaged in something that might lead to some further difficulties, did you not?
I did. As I've said before, I was emotionally distraught. I was upset with the fact that this could all come out. I mean, I was protecting the initiative. I was protecting, in my sense, the country, too.
But wasn't Colonel Earl part of the team who was also engaged in that whole operation?
Colonel Earl was involved in the shredding. He had no knowledge of the alternative documents. He knew nothing about them. He knew that I had not taken out the copies. He didn't know anything about that. All he was aware of is that there had been shredding taking place, and he participated.
One final question, if I can, Mr. Chairman. Senator Sarbanes asked you, as you were typing along, when you were changing some of the documents, I think you indicated that you were simply serving as a typist at that point. But you did testify yesterday that you had enough of an awareness, again I call it contextual intelligence, to know that you couldn't imitate John Poindexter's handwriting, so therefore you simply checked off approve. I suppose one alternative would have been to type in the statement of Admiral Poindexter and have someone initial his...
No, sir.
No?
Admiral Poindexter doesn't... I don't want to say he doesn't type. He doesn't have a habit of typing his recommendations.
But
it would have stuck out regardless. I felt that it was better if I just checked it.
And so you understood that you really couldn't have simulated the original memorandums if you had in fact typed in the PS or the notation by Admiral Poindexter, so you understood that, and therefore you checked off approve as opposed to trying to imitate it in any other way.
I believe I probably glanced at his recommendation, and as if we looked at it again, I think it kind of reads like he agreed the fact that, in fact, the ship needed to be stopped.
Well, I agree precisely with that. I think you understood that after reading the document that he understood what was involved and approved it.
No, sir, I didn't read the document. I read the recommendation or the comment made by Admiral Poindexter.
Did Oliver North ever complain to you that he would not have enough money to educate his children?
No, sir.
Thank you very much.
Sir, I'd like to comment on your comment regarding Colonel North and his grant of immunity. I think that Colonel North is first a U.S. citizen, and he has the same rights that you yourself do, sir.
I understand that. I'm not entitled to immunity. If I were called into question to claim it, I don't believe is a matter of right. I think that one can be granted immunity in an effort for a congressional committee to complete its investigation. I don't think anybody's entitled to immunity.
If the idea is to complete the investigation, then why not grant Colonel North immunity?
Well, if he was not engaged in any wrongdoing, Ms. Hall, then we wouldn't have to be involved with the question of immunity at all. But that's a matter
We
that
have
we
our
can debate
separate
later.
opinions, sir.
Mr. Foley.
May I take you back to the events of November 25th? And I don't want to keep going over old ground, but you testified that as an experienced employee of a national security agency, you understood the rules of security relating to documents and the procedures that must always be followed with relation to classified documents in particular.
That's correct, sir.
Without any reference to possible obstruction of justice, which is not the purpose of this committee to determine, did you not know that alteration of existing documents in a major, fundamental way was a violation of the responsibility of those who possess those documents?
I agree with you, sir, and at the time, as I've stated before, I felt uneasy, but sometimes, like I've said before, I believed in Colonel North, and there was a very solid and very valid reason that he must have been doing this, and sometimes you have to go above the written law, I believe. I don't know. It's just I believed in Colonel North. Maybe that's not correct. That's not a fair thing to say. I felt uneasy to begin with, and I agree with your assessment, basically.
That unauthorized destruction of documents is a gross violation of security.
I don't know that destruction. Okay, you're talking about the altered document.
The shredding.
The shredding. I don't know that was unauthorized.
You're not sure whether Colonel North had...
I don't believe...
You're not sure whether Colonel North did not have superiors' approval to destroy those documents?
I have no idea, sir.
But normally speaking, you would not be engaged in that kind of shredding as a routine daily or routine weekly or monthly activity of your office.
Sir, we never shredded to the volume we did. In my eyes, those documents could have been shredded. The prof's notes, phone logs could have been shredded every single day. If I completed a phone log, I could have shredded it that minute.
Do you have any
There's
doubt
no
that it
reason
was
why it
an-
couldn't have been shredded earlier.
Do you have any doubt that it was an unusual shredding?
It was unusual. I have said that.
Finally, under any circumstances, the removal of classified documents from the offices to which they were assigned, removal from those offices and from the building, was a gross violation of the security of those documents, which for any other purpose, any purpose at all, would justify the severest discipline. Isn't that true?
I agree that it was a gross violation, and I honestly, sir, did not know the severity of what I was doing at the time. I wish I could redo it.
No, I'm not asking particularly the state of mind, but your judgment now, and your judgment in any situation in which you were calmly analyzing the circumstances, would be that such a removal could not be justified for any purpose when it was secretive and designed to take the documents outside the confined area without authority. Isn't that
Sir,
correct?
I don't agree that it can't be justified by any means. I believe that it was definitely wrong, and then there would have to be extraneous reasons for doing that. I mean, we could make up scenarios. The KGB was coming in the door. You would take them out then. It can be justified in some circumstances. It was not in this case.
You're satisfied it was not in this case?
Yes.
Okay, Warren. Senator Heflin.
Ms. Hall, I'd like to ask your attorney to turn to Fawn Hall Exhibit 8 and ask the clerk also to give you a copy of Abrams Exhibit 10. And while they're doing that, let me ask you this. Did Colonel North ever tell you that his wife was going or had gone to Philadelphia to meet a lawyer?
No, sir.
Did the name of Willard Zucker, was that name familiar to you?
No, sir.
As far as you know then, Willard Zucker never phoned or personally talked to Colonel North at any time.
That's right.
You did not hear Mr. Hakeem or General Secord mention the name of Willard Zucker to you?
No, sir.
All right, if you will, turn to the exhibit which is marked FH8 and turn to the 5th page, I believe it is. And on the 5th page, this is the exhibit which has been known as the diversion document or diversion memo or the undated April memo, which contains the language, 12 million will be used to purchase critically needed supplies for the Nicaraguan Democratic Resistance Forces. This material is essential to cover shortages in resistance inventories resulting from their current offensive and Sandinistan counterattacks, and to bridge the period between now and when the congressionally approved lethal assistance beyond the 25 million in defensive arms can be delivered. Now, I believe you have testified that you typed that document.
Yes, sir.
All right, would you tell us, was it dictated to you by Colonel North, or was it written out and you typed it from a handwritten version, or how?
Colonel North had a policy shortly after I started working for him that it was that he would stand behind me as I was at my IBM display writer and dictate as I typed. And I believe there's very few instances where he ever wrote out anything. It was a very quick process and it worked, and I believe that's the way this document was done.
All right, so prior to the dictation that he gave you of this, had you heard anything pertaining to a $12 million diversion from Iranian arms sales to go to the Contras?
No, sir.
This was the first time that you had heard anything at all about this diversion of arms sales profits?
Sir, I typed it. I have said before that I did not know that there was a diversion of funds. I typed it. The time I'm in the office, I'm working very fast. I'm a facilitator. I move things. I make the office work. I don't retain substance. Now, after this has come along, obviously I'm a lot more knowledgeable about exactly what we were doing because I have read a lot of things. At the time, I did not know, so to say that I heard when I typed this, I didn't remember at the time.
All right, now, after you typed it, did you have any discussion with Colonel North pertaining to this diversion of profits from arms sales?
Sir, I don't believe I did. Someone asked me if I'd ever heard a joke made about the fact that Khomeini was now supporting the resistance, and at one time he was supporting the Sandinistas who were fighting them. That rings a bell. It might have been something I thought to myself and laughed. It might have been something Colonel North said. It might have been, I don't know if it was prior to this, at this, after this, I just don't remember, but the joke itself rings a bell.
All right, now, is anything else that you would like to tell us about this 12 million diversion? Well, I won't say that you'd like to. Is any other information that you have that hadn't been revealed to the committee about the $12 million arms diversion profits?
No, sir.
All right, now if you will look at Abrams exhibit number 10, this is a photocopy of the card that has this number, a bank account number that was involved in the Brunei $10 million solicitation. Does this appear to be a correct copy of what you typed on that occasion?
It appears to be that, sir.
All right, now, did Colonel North dictate the number? Did he write it out on a piece of paper, or how did you receive it to type it?
My recollection is that he passed me, I don't know if it was a piece of paper, a card, or what, but it was, I believe it was typed out when he gave it to me.
Is anything else you'd like to say about it? I didn't mean to cut you.
Just that I typed the card as I saw it, I thought, and returned both pieces of paper to Colonel North.
Did you proofread it?
No, I did not, sir. It was a very, very quick process. I remember that I was being rushed. It was very quick. I did not proofread it. I typed the card and handed both the sheet of paper and the card back to Colonel North.
Was anything said at that time by Mr. Abrams, as I understand he was there, or Colonel North about this being a bank account in which there would be $10 million, or any reference to Brunei?
Absolutely not, sir. I did not know why I was typing what I was typing.
So you did not have any knowledge whatsoever at that time pertaining to the Brunei solicitation?
That's correct.
Did after that time, did you have any, hear anything or learn anything about a Brunei donation?
Only in the newspaper, sir.
Only you didn't hear it in the office at all?
No, sir.
Had you ever typed that number before?
I don't believe so, sir.
Had you typed any Swiss bank account numbers before?
I'm not sure. I have been shown, I believe the independent counsel has run off my entire floppy disk, and there appears some account numbers on a document. It's a document of account numbers. I don't know how many, and it was on my diskette. I must have typed it. I don't remember typing it.
Well, you don't remember typing it beforehand? On any other occasion? There are other instances.
I don't remember typing.
This is the
only occasion I actually had an independent recollection of typing. Other than that, I don't have an independent recollection of typing other numbers. Obviously, I did. It was on my diskette, the other I was referring to.
I see my time is up, but let me ask you this. Did Colonel North ever make any statement to you which would indicate that he would be have control of any Swiss bank account in the event of the death of Mr. Hakim or Mr. General Secord?
No, sir.
Was there ever any conversation that you had with Colonel North would indicate that there was any connection between a death benefit or educational trust fund that would be coming from the enterprise to him?
No, sir.
Was any other discussion pertaining to a will or anything pertaining to matters that might indicate that he was being willed money that was in a Swiss bank account or any account?
No, sir.
Mr. Hyde.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to yield very briefly to Mr. Broomfield.
Thank you, Mr. Hyde. I want to make a statement that I do agree with Senator Cohen's statement that Colonel North is not really entitled to immunity, but probably an accurate description is that he ought to have an appropriate action would be to give him immunity. I think the public needs to know what happened and to get on with this investigation, get it over with so that our government can get on to the important issues facing the government. So I want to apologize to Senator Cohen. Nobody's entitled, but I think it would be appropriate action to give immunity if we're going to get all the facts and get this behind us.
Thank you, Mr. Broomfield. Ms. Hall, just briefly, without for a moment justifying any violations of law, without for a second saying that secreting classified documents and moving them out of their proper repository and altering documents and shredding important documents, without justifying that or saying that's right and that it was appropriate that you do that. Let me just try to understand your state of mind at that time and place. I can see where it would be very easy to have a siege mentality, us against them, because I feel that way in Congress. We have a let me hear me first and then see if you don't agree with me. We have a policy in Central America enunciated by the administration and supported by most Republicans, certainly not all, but most Republicans support it. And the policy is, in general, to be consistent
towards the democratic resistance fighting the communist Sandinistas. These are campesinos, thousands of people who have left their families and homes, who are fighting for the capture, the recapture of their own country, their own revolution, risking life and limb, and we have induced them to make this commitment. And all of a sudden we stop. We slam the door and we walk the other direction. Congress, by its on-again, off-again policies. Now you find yourself in a situation where you believe, you're a true believer. Ollie North is a true believer, and I'm a true believer. We believe in the cause of democracy and freedom, and that you're never going to get the Sandinistas to give up power by asking them for it. They have to be pushed. They have to be pushed as part of the strategy to get democracy restored there. Now, suddenly you find that Congress, with all its wisdom and all its power, has turned its back on these people again. We offer them refugee status if Honduras will take them. That's the best we can do. And suddenly you're besieged, and Colonel North is besieged. And you are trying to support a policy that you still believe in, and your parts of your own government, namely Congress, are really your adversaries. Is that not the mental state that you have?
I'd like to say, sir, that I don't depict, while we were working, us against the Congress. I don't believe that was the motive, not the motive, but I don't believe that was a feeling I didn't have. I didn't believe we were against the Congress. I believe we wanted to try to work with the Congress to make them to see the light, to agree with us, to support the policy, to do what is necessary. I never believed that it was us against the Congress. I believe sometimes I feel that way now, but I never felt that. I believed that what Ollie was doing, Colonel North was doing, was in fact what he said in his memorandum, trying to bridge the time between when the Congress finally made up their mind to support the Contras, if they in fact ever did.
But the policy was under siege. The policy had been rejected and repudiated by the Congress.
By some members, yes.
By the majority.
Yes.
By the majority. And here is this question of life and death and freedom and these very important issues under siege, and you are in a protective mode. And you're not alone. A lot of us feel in a protective mode towards what we conceive far more important than adhering to every jot and tittle of a law that apparently was made of silly putty because we kept changing it so much.
I agree. I think, well, I agree.
Good. Thank you.
Senator Tribble.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hall, in your dialogue with Congressman Foley, you seemed to suggest there were times when one could go above the law. Did you really mean to say that?
No, I said I believe I retracted that. I tried to retract
I wanted to give
that.
you an
We
opportunity.
often say things out of emotion that we don't necessarily mean.
All right. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to set the record straight.
Yes, I don't feel that.
You weren't suggesting here that you were serving some higher good that permitted you to undertake these activities.
No.
Now, I want to establish the timing of an event more precisely. When Colonel North returned with Mr. Green to the White House, pursuant to your phone call, was Colonel North still a member of the NSC?
I believe he still had his badge. I'm not sure. He was fired as of 12 o'clock, sir, when the press conference came. That's my interpretation of it. I don't believe he needed to be cleared back in. I believe he still had his White House pass. It might have been revoked the next day.
But he had been fired at that point.
Yes, sir.
So he was no longer a part of the NSC staff.
Yes, sir.
Now, let me ask you one other question. You talked about Colonel North attending meetings of the interagency group. This was the group whose task it was to oversee our activities in Central America. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Do you know who the members of that interagency group were?
I'll try to remember. I believe Elliot Abrams chaired the meeting. I know that Alan Fires attended. I know that Colonel North attended. DOD, I think it was Armitage. I could be wrong.
So was a
JCS, it was probably Mollering. I'm not positive.
so was a large group of people.
Yes.
And how often would this group meet?
I believe they try to meet once a week.
Now, there was also testimony that there was another rig, a smaller one, of 3 parties: Oliver North, Secretary Abrams, and a representative of the CIA. Was there another group that met regularly as well, focusing on Central American activities?
That's why I think I'm referring to the rig.
All right. So when the word rig is used in your mind, then it's this larger group that you've described?
Yes.
All right. Did Colonel North also meet on a regular basis with Secretary Abrams and a representative of the CIA relative to his activities and American policy in Central America?
I don't know. I don't recall that, sir. The only meeting I know that happened once a week, I believe, was the rig.
All right. And the rig was composed of more than 3 people?
I think it was. Yes.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Rodino.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hall, the day that the shredding took place, I think it took place in the evening, however. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Late afternoon, early evening.
Afternoon or the evening?
Yes, I think I stated yesterday that my recollection was an early evening, but according to the calendar, I believe Colonel North met with Mr. Green at 5:30 that day, and I don't believe he returned. So it must have happened before 5:30.
Now, you stated that you were protective of the initiative. Were you also concerned with protecting individuals, named individuals, on those telephone logs?
I believe so, sir. I believe that probably if the phone logs had revealed General Secord and others, that the whole thing would have unraveled. I mean, it's like, why is General Secord coming here these amount of times, blah, blah, blah. And
had it occurred to you, Ms. Hall, that that day there were congressional hearings that were going to take place relative to this matter?
I believe I knew that the DCI was having hearings, but at the time, see, now I've reviewed my calendar several times with the independent counsel and also with the staff here on the Hill. At the time, I'm working at a very fast pace, sir. I put the appointment on the calendar. The next thing I'm doing is answering phones, et cetera. It just doesn't fall into sequence. I don't see the overall picture. I didn't connect them. As I've said before, I was a facilitator. I didn't look at the overall picture.
You do recall, though, that you entered into the logs the name of John Poindexter appearing before the committees of the Congress on the 21st.
I believe that appears there, yes, sir.
And your shredding of the logs had no connection with their appearance that day?
No, sir.
Ms. Hall, we've had testimony, and I'd just like you to clear this up because you testified that you didn't recall receiving an envelope from Shirley Napier. We've had testimony, however, to the effect that there were $16,000 that was included in mail that you receipted from Shirley Napier. Now, when you say you don't recall, are you saying that it didn't occur or you just don't remember?
I have testified that I do not recall, but I do not deny.
You do not deny that
I do not deny that she delivered a package to me and that it possibly contained $16,000. I don't recall or remember ever opening a package that contained $16,000. But I don't deny that the package could have been delivered to the office, could have been delivered to me.
Had Colonel North ever instructed you not to open any mail, any particular mail?
No, sir.
Do you recall ever having seen a photo album in Colonel North's office, or did you hear Colonel North talk about a photo album which contained photos of the operation of the Enterprise in Central America?
I have seen the photo album, sir.
Do you know whether or not Colonel North in any way ever indicated to you that he showed that photo album to the President?
I have no idea, sir.
I don't have any further questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hall, you testified that one of your duties that you performed for Colonel North was to make his travel arrangements. Could you describe for the committee the types of traveling that Colonel North did, the frequency and the destination?
Colonel North traveled quite frequently in regards to the Iranian initiative and its efforts also to obtain release of the American hostages.
Were all of the trips official business?
Yes, sir.
Did anyone above Colonel North in the chain of command have to authorize his official travel, or could he do it himself when he just told you wanted to book him to go somewhere?
Absolutely not, sir. Colonel North was required to obtain authorization for every trip he made. And even, in fact, if he was to be outside of the office for just leave, he was given authorization for every trip that he made.
From Admiral Poindexter
From
or
the security
Mr.
advisor.
McFarland?
Yes.
Would you describe how the trips were paid for, the transportation, the per diem expenses, etc.?
Sir, often Colonel North's trips were done at the last minute, and the NSC procedure was that it required 5 days to get in advance, and therefore that usually wasn't the case with Colonel North's travel. So when he returned, he would fill out a voucher and be reimbursed for his travel by the NSC.
Did he fly by commercial or military or private plane?
I believe all his trips were done on commercial airliners, excluding the trip to Tehran, which was, I believe, done on a military aircraft.
When he went to address potential donors to the Contras, did he use government travel?
I don't believe he ever visited contributors in any official manner outside. They always came to the office, sir. He never traveled to see contributors. I believe that he might have visited a contributor as a friend. Purely, he took his family with him. It was as a friendly basis to become friends with a person.
You didn't know of any speeches he made to him outside of the White House?
Colonel North often made speeches to various groups. One was the Council for National Policy, and I forget how his travel was covered by that. I'll have to think about that for a moment. I believe the council paid for that travel. If we got a memorandum of his travel, we could verify that. So I believe the Council for National Policy covered his travel to and from where their meetings were held, since he was a speaker.
Now, Ms. Hall, as far as we know now, the flurry of activity in the week of November the 17th to the 21st involved the preparation of a chronology, a presidential press conference on November the 19th, the clarification of the President's comments immediately after the press conference, a meeting to prepare CIA Director Casey to testify before the Senate Intelligence Committee. Now, all of these dealt exclusively with the Iran arms deliveries and the hostages. None of them had anything to do with the Contras. Attorney General Meese has said that he knew nothing about the diversion of funds to the Contras until Saturday or Sunday. November the 22nd or 23rd. And yet on Friday the 21st, the documents that Colonel North was altering, had you alter them, shredded them, apparently all dealt with the Contra activities. And do you have any idea why Colonel North was so concerned about Contra documents on Friday the 21st before the issue had come up with anyone else so far as we know?
I don't know, sir.
No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. McCullum.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hall, I just have a couple of questions to clarify a few matters for the record, if I could. You've pretty well answered this, but I think it needs to be explicit. Has there ever been any indication to you that anyone higher than Colonel North ordered the shredding or alteration of documents on November 21st or knew anything about it?
I don't know, sir. I didn't ask Colonel North, and he didn't offer any information about why he was shredding or who had told him to shred, or perhaps if anyone had told him to shred. I can't bear any light on that. I don't know.
Nobody else you know of at all from any other source?
No, sir. Honestly, I don't know.
At any time, did you overhear Colonel North or anyone else say that they had personally discussed with President Reagan fundraising for the Contras?
I don't remember someone discussing it. I am aware that the President met with many of the contributors that contributed to the Contra effort. And I believe he might have met with some individually. I don't know.
But you don't ever recall overhearing anyone discuss their conversation with the President about the subject?
No, sir. It was my impression that he probably knew, but I don't remember.
All right. Let me ask you this. At any time, did you ever overhear Colonel North or anyone else say that they had personally discussed with President Reagan the diversion of monies from the Iran arms transactions for the benefit of the Contras?
No, sir.
At any time, did you overhear Colonel North or anyone else say that they had personally discussed with President Reagan any matter whatsoever concerning the Iranian arms deal and the hostage rescue efforts?
They had personally I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
All right.
I'm sorry.
At any time, did you overhear Colonel North or anyone else say that they had personally discussed with President Reagan any matter whatsoever concerning the Iranian arms deal or the hostage rescue efforts?
Sir, there were several meetings, I believe, with the President on those issues.
That Colonel North had, right?
Yes, that he attended.
And he did mention to you the fact that he discussed these things with the President personally?
No, he didn't, sir. He attended the meetings. Colonel North attended the meetings in which the President was present, that those matters were discussed.
But other than those occasions, you do not recall any discussions that someone described to you with the President about the Iranian arms matters or about the hostage rescue efforts?
No, sir.
Okay. There's one figure in all of this who we have not discussed. You described for a number of people different relationships that Colonel North had with other figures in the government at the time. I don't recall you describing the relationship between Colonel North and Donald Regan. Could you do that for us?
I wasn't asked about it. Sir, I don't know what the relationship was specifically. Don Regan never called on the phone, or Colonel North never called Don Regan. I don't know that they ever met privately. Don Regan, as I understand it, was he took on as Chief of Staff a role that he decided that he attended every meeting. I believe he attended most meetings. He was included on the list of presidential meetings, etc. I wouldn't say that the relationship was close.
Did Colonel North ever express his views to you about Donald Regan?
I don't believe so, sir.
Do you know who called Colonel North to tell him he was fired or how he learned it?
No, I don't.
Okay. I don't have any more questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
A vote is pending in the House. There are 3 more members in the House side under the 5-minute rule, and I understand 1 senator. That senator is not here at the moment. May I suggest that we take about a 10 or 15-minute recess The chair would like to complete its work this morning rather than come into an afternoon session. So the chair declares a 10 to 15-minute recess while the House votes. The joint hearings will resume. Mr. Boland.
Ms. Hall, you said that your concealing of documents on your person and taking them past security and out of the White House was motivated, at least in part, by a fear that they might fall into the hands of unauthorized parties. Is that correct?
That was my feeling, to protect live sources and that type of thing for the security of the country, rather than from a more, what some people might refer to as a more negative motivation. It was purely from that.
You gave those documents to Colonel North in the presence of Tom Green. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And did you presume that Green had a clearance sufficient to review the documents?
I did not assume that. I didn't give them to Mr. Green. I didn't show them to Mr. Green. I didn't talk about them with Mr. Green. I gave them to Colonel North.
You testified in a response to a question by Mr. Stokes that while you were not a policymaker, your working for Colonel North gave you some understanding of the Iran initiative and the Contra initiative. Is that correct?
A feeling of it, yes.
Did you know that Colonel North had directed the employees of the Department of Defense to assist the Contras in identifying the location of potential targets in Nicaragua?
No, sir.
Did you know that Colonel North had directed the employees of the Department of State to open a southern military front in Nicaragua?
I was aware of the fact that there was a southern military front, referred to I think as the Southern Front. I do not know that he directed the State Department to do so.
All right, thank you. Did you know that Colonel North had directed employees of the Central Intelligence Agency to assist in the resupply of the Contras with military equipment?
No, sir. I don't know that Colonel North directed anybody to do anything. I don't.
Who did it appear to you was directing Colonel North activities in behalf of the Contras?
Who is directing his activities on behalf of the Contras? Is that the question?
Well, the question is, you are aware, of course, that Colonel North was interested in the Contra problem. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes.
And who did it appear to you was directing Colonel North activities in behalf of the Contras?
Colonel North worked for the National Security Advisor. I assume he took all directions, and I feel that he took all directions from the National Security Advisor.
Now, in another area, how often did Spitz Channel come by the office to see Colonel North from the time that you started to work for Colonel North in February of 1983? How often from that time to November of 1986 did Spitz Channel come by the office?
Maybe 15 or 20 times.
Was he in contact with Colonel North? Was Spitz Channel in contact with Colonel North frequently during that period of time?
I don't think it...
By telephone?
By telephone, I would say not. The visits were more than the phone calls. Mr. Channel, I'd like to say, was a very aggressive, persistent person, and often when Spitz would call, he insisted on talking to Colonel North, and I just told him that he was unavailable. And a lot of times Colonel North did not have time to deal with Spitz Channel, and I would say, sometimes he was even frustrated with the numerous phone calls that came in from Spitz Channel. He did not take many of those calls. Like I have said before, I believe that Spitz Channel possibly visited the office 15 to 20 times, and I wouldn't say that they talked frequently on the phone. Spitz Channel called frequently, but they did not talk frequently.
Now, you testified that William Casey was an infrequent visitor to Colonel North's office. That's correct, isn't it?
Director Casey?
Director Casey, William
Director
Casey.
Casey has visited the office on 2 occasions, I believe, and that is it.
On the occasions, Ms. Hall, that he did come to the office, that Director Casey did come to Colonel North's office, was he accompanied by anyone?
Director Casey was always accompanied by bodyguards. But
Now, Director Casey had an office in the EOB, too, didn't he?
Yes, sir.
And to your knowledge, did Colonel North frequent Director Casey at that office?
I would not say that it was frequent. He has visited that office when Director Casey has called him down there. And I would say in the 4 years, I could be very wrong. I mean, there would be times when I might be out, but my best estimate would be 5 or 6 times possibly.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Senator Nunn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hall, how strongly did you feel about the substance of our policy in Central America?
When you say our policy, I'm sorry.
The United States policy.
The administration's policy.
Yes.
I felt very strongly about it. I believed in the administration's policy to support the Contras.
And you felt that it was crucial to our nation's security to support the Contras?
Absolutely, without a doubt.
Have you had that view for a long time?
I came to have that view after working on the issue for 4 years, which I think is, we're exposed to the facts in our office, and I believe that's a fair way to make your opinions.
Did you sit around and discuss the policy with Colonel North or others in the office?
We were too busy to discuss matters, sir.
The thing that's curious to me is if you felt that strongly about the policy, it seems to me that your answers yesterday may have some conflict with that feeling. You stated yesterday that you typed but did not read the substance of what you were typing, even very important memorandums. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
You weren't curious about important memorandums when you felt very important about the substance of the policy?
I was, sir, but as I've stated before, our office was extremely busy. I have testified that at one point I took a copy of the Tehran minutes in order that I might better understand in detail the initiative. In fact, I never got to read those minutes. I was too busy.
You didn't read them during breaks or after
Absolutely.
hours?
I didn't have breaks. We never had breaks.
How many hours a day did you work?
12 hours a day or more.
You stated yesterday that on repeated occasions you did not ask Colonel North about policy questions. You just didn't have time?
That's correct.
How did you pick up this strong feeling of supporting the Contras if you never read anything you typed and you never discussed it with him?
Sir, it's very easy. If you skim things, after 4 years you're bound to pick up a feeling.
Did you read the newspapers? Did you
No, I never read a newspaper practically in 4 years that I worked for him. I never had time.
Didn't read the Washington Post even?
Sir, I didn't.
New York Times?
Sir, on very few occasions when Colonel North's name started appearing in the newspapers, I tried to clip the papers out, but I didn't have time to read the articles. In fact, I still have those at home and I haven't read them.
Well, it seems to me if you didn't read the papers and you didn't discuss it and you didn't read what you typed, there must be some reason you developed, we haven't yet been told, to develop such a strong feeling on the substance of the policy.
Sir, I've said before that after working 4 years, 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, I wouldn't consider someone too bright if they didn't pick up something after doing all that. You don't have to read something in detail. I'm sure all of us have skimmed the front page of a Washington Post or a New York Times and got a feeling or a mood of what is going on in a certain article. You don't have to read the article in detail.
Did you have a great deal of faith in Colonel North personally? Did you like him and admire him?
Absolutely.
Did that have something to do with your support of the Contras, the fact that you had such a
No, sir. Me and Colonel North, I think, probably disagreed on some items. I wasn't solely a fanatic about Colonel North. I believe and admire him, and I'm a grown-up and adult, and I can form my own opinions and morals.
Did you ever tell him that anything he was doing was legal or questionable?
I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what's legal and what's not legal, sir.
Did you ever tell him that anything was either right or wrong, that you felt it was getting into an area of grayness or anything that was uncertain?
No, sir.
Never had any doubts about right or wrong in what you were doing?
Absolutely not.
Looking back on it, do you?
I think it was wrong of me to remove documents from Suite 302.
Do you think it was wrong for him to ask you to do so?
He didn't ask me to do so.
Do you think it was wrong for him to ask you to shred documents?
My feeling, someone said the unauthorized shredding of documents. When was it unauthorized? I don't know that it was unauthorized.
So you think everything you did
The office was secured on November 25th. The shredding took place on November 21st, sir.
The only thing you have any remorse about at all then is removing those documents?
Sir, I wish a lot of things could have been done differently. I wish that Congress had voted money for the Contras so this wouldn't have had to happen.
In other words, you wouldn't have had to shred the documents if Congress had gone on and done its job and voted aid.
I believe that, sir, I have no comment.
Have you talked, Ms. Hall, to Colonel North since you knew you were going to testify?
Absolutely not, sir. The last time I spoke to Colonel North was on Betsy's birthday, March 9th, 1986.
March 9th, 1986.
87.
87. Have you ever discussed with him in any way your testimony?
Absolutely not.
Has he ever given you any instructions or suggestions about what you should say?
No, sir, and I think that's clear in my testimony regarding my visit to Brendan Sullivan's office when he introduced me to Brendan Sullivan and said he was his lawyer and to tell him everything, that he was a friend.
Has anyone
and
else?
in fact, I did not tell Brendan Sullivan everything because I was still in my protective mode. I never received instructions on how to handle the situation.
Has anyone else in the executive branch of government given you any instructions about what you should testify to or any suggestions or helpful hints?
Absolutely not.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Hall, I'm informed that one other member is on his way and would like to ask some questions. While we're waiting for him, I want to thank you for your testimony on behalf of the committee. I think you're aware from the comments that have been made by members that we all appreciate the difficult circumstances in which you have been in and are in. You've certainly helped the committee, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, I would like to make some statements about Phase 1, which we are concluding of our hearings. If Mr. Jenkins comes in during my statement, then we'll return to him for questions. For the past 6 weeks, these committees have been meeting to try to find out what went wrong in the processes of the American government and why. We've heard about 110 hours or more of testimony from about 18 witnesses. Surely, it seems to me, these committees have heard some of the most extraordinary testimony ever given to the United States Congress. Let me mention a few things that stand out in my mind. An elaborate private network was set up to carry out the foreign policy of the United States. Private citizens, many with divided loyalties and profit motives, sold arms and negotiated for the release of American hostages. Private citizens were given top-secret codes and encryption devices and had access to Swiss bank accounts used for United States covert actions and operations. The President was involved in private and third country fundraising for the Contras. Wealthy private contributors were courted at the White House, solicited in coordination with government officials, and given what they told was secret information. American policy became dependent on the contributions of private individuals and third countries. The President approved the payment of fines, or funds rather, to terrorists to secure the release of hostages. Senior officials did not know and chose not to know important facts about policy. A national security advisor and an assistant secretary of state withheld information and did not tell the Congress the truth concerning U.S. involvement in the Contra supply operation and the solicitation of funds from third countries. When official involvement with the Contras was prohibited, officials of the National Security Council raised money, helped procure arms, and set up a private network to ship arms to the Contras. A United States ambassador negotiated an agreement with Costa Rica for a secret airstrip, and a CIA agent facilitated supply flights. An official designated by the Secretary of State as a loose cannon carried out highly sensitive negotiations to obtain the release of American hostages. He gave the approval of the White House to a plan to depose Saddam Hussein and to go to war with the Soviet Union in defense of Iran. This same official participated with others in an effort to rewrite chronologies, altered critical documents, and organized a shredding party to destroy those documents. And money from the sale of U.S. arms to Iran was diverted to the Contras and for the use of several private individuals. Money raised for the Contras was used to finance a DEA operation to seek release of hostages. Contra funds were also provided to Colonel North, perhaps even, although this is not proven, for personal use. What these committees have heard is a depressing story. It is a story of not telling the truth to the Congress and to the American people. It is a story about remarkable confusion in the processes of government. Those involved, whether public officials or private citizens, had no doubt they were acting on the authority of the President of the United States. At the outset, Chairman Inouye appropriately asked, how could this have happened here? The question now is, how can we prevent it from happening again? For me, these events raise several questions and concerns. First, our government cannot function cloaked in secrecy. It cannot function unless officials tell the truth. The Constitution only works when the two branches of government trust one another and cooperate. Policy failed here because the processes of government failed. As Mr. McFarland told these committees, when the President and the Congress cannot agree, to charge ahead is to invite disaster. Second, privatization of foreign policy is a prescription for confusion and failure. The advancement of American national interest depends on the full use of the many resources of the United States government. We are ill-served when it is otherwise. The use of private parties to carry out the high purposes of government make us the subject of puzzlement and ridicule. Third, accountability, including personal responsibility, has been absent. My concern is not simply the accountability of funds, but accountability for policy. Who supervised Colonel North? Who was responsible for U.S. funds earned from the sale of U.S. arms? Who asked whether actions taken were lawful? Accountability requires supervision and acceptance of responsibility up the chain of command. High officials cannot look the other way or distance themselves from key aspects of policy or the actions of those they supervise. Accountability requires rigorous oversight by the Congress and a full exercise of the process of checks and balances under the Constitution. It requires, above all, the operation of the normal processes of government. These committees have heard a great deal during these past 6 weeks, and we've got much to reflect upon. When these hearings resume later in June, probably June 22nd, with other witnesses, which we will announce later, my guess is that the committees will return to these themes: making the shared powers of the Constitution work, the privatization of American foreign policy, and the accountability and responsibility of public officials. I want to thank Chairman Inouye and Senator Redmond, the Vice Chairman, and the Ranking Member, Representative Cheney, and all of the members of the two committees for their extraordinary commitment and attendance and diligence at these sessions. And before we recess the hearings, I see that Congressman Jenkins has come in, but Congressman Jenkins, do you want to be recognized?
Mr. Chairman, all the questions I intended to ask have already been asked.
Thank you, sir. The hearings stand in recess.
You, no, you keep them until we get outside, and it was not until you'd arrived in the car that the documents were actually transferred over to Colonel North. Is that right?
That's correct.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have nothing further.
Mr. Van Cleve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hall, I have only a couple of questions.
Would you please refer to Committee Exhibit 8, FH8? You've testified that on the afternoon of November 21st, 1986, Colonel North gave you a group of documents that had been marked up and asked you to make a series of alterations and changes in them. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
To the best of your recollection, was this document or any form of this document among the documents that Colonel North asked you to alter that day?
No, sir.
And would your answer be the same as to Committee Exhibit 8A?
Yes, sir.
And is your recollection on that point clear?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
We will begin with the, under the 15-minute rule with the principal questioner, Senator Boren.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hall, we appreciate very much the candor of your testimony yesterday and the thoroughness of your testimony, and I will do my best not to duplicate the questions that were asked of you yesterday, but there are just a few items I'd like to go back over with you this morning. Okay. You testified that during the day on November 21st, when you were working on altering the documents, and later when you were shredding some of the documents or assisting Colonel North in doing so, that you became increasingly uneasy during this period of time.
I don't know that I became increasingly uneasy, sir. I think I testified that I was uneasy when Colonel North asked me to alter the documents, and I think you could say that we became increasingly busy.
Yes. Why? That was clear. Why were you uneasy?
I was initially had a moment of uneasiness when he asked me to alter the documents because, in fact, they were completed actions that had gone to a person and had had an action taken, and to change the content of a memorandum that had already been approved was something I was uneasy with. But again, I had that moment of uneasiness. It passed because, as I've said before, I believe strongly in Colonel North. I believe him to be an honest, fair, and a good person with good motives.
You felt he simply wouldn't have asked you to have done anything if it had been improper.
Correct.
Now, on the day of Tuesday, the day of the press conference, you indicated that Colonel North came back to the office and he indicated to you that he had been fired by the President.
Yes, sir.
And then you watched the press conference together. Was there anyone else there besides the two of you watching the press conference?
Yes, sir. A friend of Colonel North's and ours had been in the building, I assume, to visit someone else, and he, probably unknowing what was going to happen also, just happened to tap on the door and came in, and his name was Bill Kernan. He works in Roslyn, and he was just a friend and just wanted to shake his hand and say hello, and in fact, the press conference started. He joined us in the office, and I believe Colonel Earl and possibly Craig Coy were in the office also.
How did the group and how did Colonel North react to the press conference as you were watching it?
We all watched it. I frankly was stunned. Colonel North didn't really show any emotion. I mean, I believe he was probably, from my knowing him, disappointed, but also I believe, I don't know if it's come out, but Colonel North, I believe, I've come to know that he had offered his resignation also. I think he probably was disappointed in the fact that he was fired rather than his resignation being accepted, but he did not get angry, he didn't bang the table, he didn't get upset, he didn't say bad words. He just took it.
Was Colonel North indicated to you that he had offered his resignation?
I can't remember if he had or not. I think it might have come out that morning that he had. I think it probably came out when he mentioned that the President had fired him. But as I've said before, he never showed any anger towards the President or I think my only knowing him that I'm sure that he must have been disappointed.
Then did he leave before you left the office? You said you went to lunch with a friend that day in the White House mess. Did Colonel
It was
North
a special
leave,
occasion. I had invited a good friend of mine. It was unusual. In fact, I never hardly went to lunch, but this was a special occasion. And again, I hadn't expected, that event to occur that day. And Colonel North, excuse me, when I had was very upset and I said I was going to cancel lunch, I just couldn't go to lunch, I couldn't think straight. He said, no, he says, don't let this get you, this is a special day, I think you should go. He insisted that I go, and I did so. and I believe that he was gone when I returned.
Then, and then what time did the representatives of the security staff come to, in essence, seal the office?
My recollection, it was in the late afternoon. I could be wrong. I think it was around possibly 4.
So they'd been there a while when you reached Colonel North on the telephone?
Yes, sir.
And then it took a while for him to come on over. They were there sealing the office, and
I don't think he planned to return to the office. As I said before, I placed the call when I realized that Brenda Rieger and the others were going to, in fact, close up for the evening, and I had discovered the altered documents and the others, as I've mentioned, and I needed to talk to him. I needed to know, for him to come back.
Were you at all concerned? You mentioned then getting the documents once he got there, and the three of you, Colonel North and Mr. Green, yourself, leaving the building. Were you at all concerned at that point, since at that point in time you knew the President had dismissed Colonel North, you knew they were attempting to seal the office, obviously to secure the documents. Were you at all concerned yourself about placing yourself in any jeopardy to be taking the documents out at that point?
Sir, I was emotionally distraught at the time. It's a policy of mine, as I've said before, not to talk about what I do, and also to protect what we were doing in the office, and I believed in the Iran initiative and the Contra initiative, and I thought that exposure of it would have bad ramifications, and again, I was emotional, and I don't think I realized at the time the ramifications or the seriousness of my actions.
Yes. That's understandable. And as you're leaving the building, you first made a gesture, some sign out in the corridor that you...
For a secretary to do rather than for Colonel North, and as a result you offered to help him.
That's correct.
Did he at that time tell you that this was something you should not get involved in?
No.
He didn't tell you, Fawn or Ms. Hall, whatever he called you, go home, don't worry about this, this is nothing you should have anything to do with?
No, I was part of the team.
So he permitted you to participate with him in shredding this stack of documents?
Yes, sir.
And let me now just move to November 25th. I take it you've testified that you watched the press conference, you had lunch, came back from lunch. There came a time when Brenda Rieger, the NSC security officer, was packing up the office, putting boxes away, and at that time you recognized or saw that these altered documents and the copies of them were still on top of your desk.
That's correct.
And this caused you some concern, and there comes a time when you communicate with Colonel North, and I think that you testified that in your time you called him, you attempted to convey to him that there was a problem with the documents.
I attempted to convey to him that there was a problem with documents, yes. As I've testified before, I was talking in a whisper and not really saying anything over the phone. I mean, in graphic terms, it was sort of vague, but I was trying by the tone of my voice to get across that there was some urgency, and then I insisted that he come back.
But in any event, you at least conveyed that there was something going on at the office and that he simply had to return.
Yes, I did.
And after that conversation, you go upstairs and secrete the documents about your person, and about that time, Colonel North does show up.
That's correct.
You had a conversation with them inside of his office.
Yes.
And did you indicate to him at that time that you had documents in your back?
Yes, I did. I don't think I indicated to him that they were in my boots, but I did turn slightly and say, do you notice that I have them in here? Can you tell? Will anybody be able to see that I have these in my back? That was the idea, and he said no.
And you knew at that time that if you were to leave the room that Ms. Rieger would be checking briefcases and other things to ensure that documents would not be taken out of the room.
Yes, sir.
And I take it Colonel North knew that as well.
Colonel North, yes, was asked his briefcase to be checked, yes.
And so when these documents were actually taken outside of the room and past the security checkpoint, if you will, it was you who actually took them out.
That's correct.
But Colonel North knew that you were going to take these documents out.
He knew I had documents that I was taking out, yes.
And if someone was going to be stopped at the exit of that office, it was going to be you, not Colonel North.
Yes.
At the elevator on the third floor, as you were getting ready to leave the building, did you at that time attempt to give him the documents or once again indicate that you wanted to get rid of him?
Yes, I did. As I've said, I motioned with, I don't remember with a gesture or a word that I was going to give them to him, and he said, why don't we just wait till we get outside?
So again, it was you who actually carried the documents outside of the building.
Yes, sir.
And it was because he told
The joint hearings of the two select committees will come to order. We'll proceed with questioning by counsel. Mr. Eggleston, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hall, yesterday you testified about the diversion memos, and I think that you testified that you believed you typed them sometime in the spring of 1986. If you could turn to Exhibit 8 in the book in front of you. Do you have that in front of you?
Yes, sir.
And I believe it was also your testimony that you recalled that this particular memo had been through a series of different drafts back and forth as different corrections were made. Is that your recollection?
Yes, sir, it is.
And I think that you also testified that you had some recollection that Admiral Poindexter at some time might have made some corrections to this document as well.
That's my memory. I'm not sure if it's accurate, but that's my memory.
And do you recall that this document near the end of it makes reference to the need to get the President's approval for the plan that's set forth in the particular document?
I believe it says that, sir. Just a moment.
Okay, I think it's on.
Yes. Yes, it is, sir.
Okay. And this is the document that actually sets forth the diversion of some amount of money to the Contras. Do you recall that?
Yes.
It's on page 4. Let me ask you, are you familiar, there was a prof message and it was previously provided to the committee and declassified, and it was McFarland Exhibit number 73, I think. It is not in the book in front of you, but I would just like to read to you from this exhibit, and I think it corroborates your recollection of Admiral Poindexter's involvement in this particular memorandum. It is a prof note that was written from Colonel North to Mr. McFarland on April 7th of 1986, and it is relating to Mr. McFarland, the events that had taken place with a meeting between Colonel North and Ghorbanifar only a few days prior to this note. And in this prof note it says, quote, per request of JMP, have prepared a paper for our boss which lays out these arrangements. I take it the boss of Mr. McFarland and Admiral Poindexter and Colonel North is likely to be the President. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would, sir.
Let me further tell you that the document which you have in front of you as Exhibit 8 is the document which the Attorney General actually found over the weekend of November 22nd of 1986. And this is the document which has been provided as well to the committees pursuant to our various document requests. If you could look at page 1 of this document, I think you have testified about the handwriting in the upper right-hand corner. In addition, about a quarter of the way down the page, it reads, on September 14, and the 14 is crossed out. Do you see that there?
Yes, sir.
And a correction is made to this particular document. Is that true?
Yes, sir.
And a 13 is written above that?
Yes, sir.
Let me direct you now to Exhibit 8A. If you look at Exhibit 8A, and if you look at the same line to which I just directed your attention, the correction, the 14 has now been changed to a 13. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And let me also advise you that this document has been fairly recently received by the committee, and that this document had actually been on your floppy disk of your computer. Have you been told that?
I believe I have.
And this document was never provided and was apparently in no one's files as a hard copy. Have you been told that as well?
That it was found as a hard copy in a file?
That it was never found.
Oh, it was never
found. A
found.
hard copy of it was never found.
I believe I've heard that, yes.
And that the only version of this that anyone has ever found was what was actually on your computer disk.
Yes.
And I guess it's also fair to say that it appears that this is a later document, that the correction that was on Exhibit 8 has now been made onto Exhibit 8A. Is that fair?
Yes.
And I guess you also know that no cover memo was ever found for these documents indicating a transmittal from Colonel North to Admiral Poindexter or any further transmittal of this document onto the President. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
You have testified that Admiral Poindexter made various changes on this document. I take it that the changes that you recall, you do not recall him responding to this document that the idea is crazy, that we can't do this. The changes he made were textual changes. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So he never returned the document suggesting that this policy or plan should not be pursued.
That's correct.
Ms. Hall, let me move quickly to another area. I was struck yesterday in your testimony about one particular aspect, and let me just ask you some questions about that. Is it fair to say that at the time on November 21st when you received the altered original documents, or the original documents from Colonel North, that you received this as an ordinary secretarial assignment? He simply handed you the documents, that there were changes on them, and that you anticipated that you were to make the changes?
Yes.
Is that fair?
Yes.
He did not discuss with you at that time what it was that he was planning to do?
That's correct.
And he did not discuss with you the gravity of making changes on original System 4 documents?
No, he did not.
I think that you testified yesterday that at the time that he placed these in front of you, you were somewhat uneasy.
That's true.
And you made the changes and the corrections because you recall, or you trusted Colonel North and you believed that what he would be doing was right. Is that fair?
That's correct.
And after making these alterations and after doing the various copies, I think it was your testimony that you recall that you may have been interrupted at a time when Colonel North was standing at the shredder and shredding various documents.
Yes, I believe that's my memory.
Okay. And as a secretary, you saw your boss shredding documents. I take it you thought this was something that was more appropriate